about the psyche of people who do business down on Wall Street and how they'll be able to get themselves psychologically prepared to get back in there and get back to business.
Well, it's not only psychologically, it's actually physically getting the people back into the NYSE, which is literally was in the shadow of the World Trade Center and is an icon of Wall Street itself, so that there was great concern that it itself might be a target. But yes, psychologically, this is very, very difficult, and many of the people whom I interview on a regular basis are still unaccounted for. It's very difficult for all of us, you know, the thousands of people who are yet unaccounted for. Very, very difficult for the entire community.
I know I've got some friends who work at Morgan Stanley, and I know a lot of businesses like Morgan Stanley, other businesses are based in the World Trade Center. Some are being accounted for. There's going to be a lot of loss of life and a lot of loss of paper.
Yes.
Sheer paperwork. And we're talking about billions of dollars here, and just so much that's going to be lost.
Yes, records, computer files. We have yet to see, I think, exactly what will happen when that opening bell rings. We will have to see, you know, how many glitches there actually are. But I think, again, officials are quite anxious to get it going. We're trying to get back to business as usual as a slap, basically, to the terrorists who tried to take it out.
Saying they can't stop us, they can't stop our markets.
Absolutely.
All right, senior correspondent Brenda Butner, it's great to have you staying up late with us tonight.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. President Bush says the attacks against America, not just acts of terrorism, he says they were acts of war.
He says the U.S. is ready to face its enemy.
Just completed a meeting with our national security team, and we've received the latest intelligence updates. The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve, but make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America is united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
And we want to take you now back down to Lower Manhattan, where rescue workers continue to dig at the site where the World Trade Center towers once stood. David Lee Miller is joining us. He has been, and he continues to join us from downtown where that search is taking place. Hi, David.
Hi there, Rick. A very difficult situation was made even more tense a few hours ago when the southerly tower, parts of that, further collapsed. Also, there were reports that two other buildings adjacent to the World Trade Towers were going to give way. Some of the workers there said the windows began to pop out. They noticed cracks in the structure that had been weakened. And suddenly we found that workers, emergency crews, equipment was being brought down Church Street, which is now where we are located, away from the site. For a while, some of the workers began to run in the opposite direction from the area where the towers once stood. In fact, we were live on the air. Police pulled the plug literally on our cameras and microphones and relocated us to this location where they thought it would be much safer. We have since learned now that for the most part that was a false alarm. The buildings they thought were teetering that could give way show no signs of doing that, at least in the near future, and most of the workers have returned to the scene. The rescue operation is now continuing. They do, however, face a very difficult and gruesome task. In fact, earlier we talked to a volunteer doctor who has been here. He, in fact, treated 4 of the survivors, and he said that the scene about 10 blocks from where I am now located looks a lot worse than what you see on television.
I think it does a disservice to the American people not to have media access right at the scene, as long as it's secure and it doesn't jeopardize any national security, because what you see from far away, the shots that I'm seeing, it does not describe the horrific nature of the trauma, both physically, in terms of life, in terms of psychological trauma, of all the rescue workers, the victims. You have to be up close. It looks like a volcano went off, not a bomb. There's ash knee deep. It's the craziest thing you've ever seen, and the American public needs to see it. They need to see what has been done to this country.
I'm not sure that many Americans would like to see, if given the chance, all that devastation up close and personal. It is, according to those we have talked with, very, very disturbing. If this helps put it in perspective, the mayor of the city of New York, Rudy Giuliani, is asking federal officials now for 6,000 body bags, and that's to supplement the ones that the city already has. And further complicating things, we are now getting reports that there are asbestos particles in the air caused by the blast of the Twin Towers, and for that reason we are wearing these masks, as are the rescue workers, all the time, because they say there is a serious health risk. Back to you in the studio.
All right, David, put your mask on. Thanks for the report. We'll check back with you. More than 200 people remain unaccounted for at the Pentagon. Rescue crews there are hoping to have enough demolition work done by daybreak to enter into that impact area.
Fox's David Schuster is live at the Pentagon with the latest. And David, what is concerning everybody the most right now at the Pentagon?
Well, Laura, the greatest concern is simply the structure on the south side of the Pentagon where that American Airlines jetliner crashed into it. It has been very unstable. It's been described as leaning at a 45-degree angle, some of the walls and beams. And until they can really strengthen that part of the building, it is very unsafe, according to fire and rescue crews, for them to go very far. The good news, though, is that it's been a totally different scene this evening than it was just 12 hours ago. The fires are completely out. There's not that same sort of odor or stench in the air of the burning flames and the burning debris. Furthermore, for the first time now, a lot of the lights are on the north side of the Pentagon, something that was completely dark last night. And you are actually seeing the parking lots filling up with people. So clearly people are back to work at the Pentagon, at least in those areas that were unaffected by either the explosion or the flames or the dumping of hundreds of gallons of water a minute to try to control those flames earlier today. But again, workers describe the structure as being very unstable. Despite that, they have managed to recover some 80 bodies. There were reports from Arlington fire crews about 15 hours ago that the death toll might rise to as high as 800 because of the number of people that worked on the south side of the Pentagon where the jetliner went in. But since then, everybody at the Pentagon, including the Secretary of Defense, has tried to dismiss some of those claims. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, had a news conference earlier today. Here's part of what he had to say.
We currently believe and are certainly hopeful that the number of casualties being reported in the press is high. As you know from your own observation out there, the work is still going forward, and we won't know for some time precise numbers, but from everything that we currently know, the estimate that's been widely reported is considerably high.
Now, while they are optimistic that the numbers may only go as high as 150, 175, there is not much hope at all here at the Pentagon of finding anybody alive. One of the reasons is because some of the fire and rescue crews have been able to drop in listening devices off of some of the baskets that they essentially lower into the crevice created by that explosion on the side of the Pentagon. Those listening devices, Rick and Lori, have picked up absolutely nothing.
David, as far as the Pentagon being the scene of a crime, do they feel like they're going to be able to get any kind of useful evidence or information from the crash site?
Rick, good question. It's not really clear yet. Earlier today, around noon, we saw lots of FBI agents, in fact, just a few hundred yards behind us, sweeping the grounds, looking for any pieces of the plane that might have been exploded back on the impact there. So clearly they're looking for every small piece of evidence they can find. It doesn't appear, at least as far as we can tell, that they've been able to get far enough into the building and the debris to really either look for the black boxes on that jetliner or any other evidence. But that is something that's on their mind. The FBI has literally dozens of agents on the ground, but on the grounds, but also inside the building itself. They're looking hard, but it's hard to tell if they found anything yet.
David, another quick question for you.
Sure.
A very touching moment earlier today at the Pentagon. President Bush visited the Pentagon, and it was during his trip there that the Stars and Stripes were proudly unfurled over part of the roof of the Pentagon.
That's right. That's actually the second or third time they've done that. There were lower flags there were smaller flags that were lowered on the Pentagon last night and again early this morning. But somebody apparently brought that giant-sized flag, and they decided that before the president came, that the firefighters, to sort of show their symbolism of the effort that they're doing, drape the flag. It's worth pointing out, Rick and Lori, that a lot of talk radio stations in Washington, the Washington area, are actually encouraging people to fly their flags. And so when we were coming in from Georgetown tonight, parts of Arlington, you can see a lot of homes now in the area have flags that are flying, a lot of buildings. There's a lot of signs made. There was a handwritten sign that said, "Rest in peace, those who were killed." That sort of thing we're seeing pop up all over the Washington area. So maybe not so much of a surprise that some of the rescue workers would fly a flag themselves.
All right, David Schuster reporting live from the Pentagon. Thanks very much. We just wanted to point out that the pictures that you were looking at were from New York City down in Lower Manhattan, where the exhausted rescue recovery crews continue to dig hour after hour. As there, we get another live picture.
Investigators say that they know the identities of more than a dozen men who hijacked those 4 planes on Tuesday. Apparently, the suspects left a trail up and down the East Coast.
Fox's Todd Connor has all the details. He's been following it for us all night. Todd, what's the latest on this?
Well, Lori and Rick, a little bit of breaking news here. This coming from an LA Times article today. They are saying that authorities searching for these terrorists have actually identified a team of as many as 50 infiltrators who supported or carried out the strikes. This, according to a source familiar with the investigation, telling this to the LA Times. The source said about 40 of the men have been accounted for, including those killed in the suicide attacks. And they are looking for 10 others who may have helped kill thousands of innocent Americans. Now, the FBI believes they may find some of their answers in Boston. Wednesday, agents with shields and bulletproof vests stormed Boston's Westin Hotel. 3 people were taken into custody at that time. They were later released. 2 of the flying bombs, as we all know, that struck the Trade Center came out of Boston's Logan International Airport, an airport which is now beefing up their security. Tow trucks have moved 2,000 cars from a parking garage, where authorities also found a rental car, possibly left behind by the hijackers. They confirmed it contained Arabic language flight training manuals, and the Boston Globe reports it also had an instructional video on flying commercial airlines and a fuel consumption calculator. Now, 400 FBI agents in Florida are checking out a few flight training schools down there, including Embry-Riddle, as you see right there. They're trying to determine if the killer pilots got their training at that school.
We are cooperating with the FBI and other law enforcement officials. We are quickly responding to each and every request.
Also, back to this article from the LA Times, they report that in the hours after the assaults, agents searching cars and apartments up and down the East Coast found suicide notes in New York that some of the hijackers wrote for their parents. This coming from a story out of the LA Times. Also, I should report that our Brett Baer has reported that a few months ago, an American Airlines crew had their room broken into in Rome, Italy, and that their uniforms and their IDs had been stolen. Well, a couple of weeks ago, American Airlines sent out a memo to its people reporting or asking them to be on the lookout for imposter pilots. No word if they had any connection with this particular attack on us, but that's the latest from here. Lori and Rick, back to you.
Todd, thanks very much. So many questions on a lot of people's minds, including how do terrorists learn to fly commercial airplanes? We just heard a little bit about those schools that they might have attended right here in the United States, of all places.
And of course, we know that the traffic in the air has been completely stopped. No planes, or very few planes, are being allowed to take off and land. And the question is, when will the skies be open for business again? Joining
us now on the telephone is former NTSB investigator and former FAA scientist, Dr. Alan Deal. Dr. Deal, thanks very much for talking to us.
Glad to be here. Obviously, the circumstances are rather traumatic and tragic.
They sure are. Let's talk first of all about some changes that are going to have to take place immediately in the commercial airlines business. What do you see happening, and how quickly is it going to happen?
Well, clearly the Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Mineta, is looking at what needs to be done. I think that's one of the reasons why they're continuing to hold the aircraft on the ground. As we all know, they talked about lifting the ban or the grounding today at noon, and they decided not to do that. I suspect, obviously, the ground boarding defense mechanisms will be beefed up immensely. They may have to change the so-called psychological profiles of the types of people they're looking for. Those, by the way, had been curtailed somewhat because of allegations of
racial profiling.
Racial profiling, I guess, is the best word. But they've served us in good stead over the decades. And
tell us what you mean by that. You're talking about the kind of people that the airlines supposedly look for before they get on the airplane?
Exactly. If you remember, after I guess it was the Mariel boat lift, there were a number of Cubans that wanted to go back to Cuba. There was a rash of hijackings, and of course what they did is if they saw people that fit that general description, they didn't necessarily deny them boarding, but they singled them out for a lot of additional searches, and they were at a heightened degree of vigilance if they fit the profile. Obviously, the details of the profile are classified, but I'm not sure they're still using those because of the allegations of racial profiling, in recent months, I guess.
Mr. Deal, obviously the big question is how on earth could this have happened? How could 4 hijackings have taken place? Everyone's saying this was a well-coordinated attack. It had been planned for months, et cetera, et cetera. But couldn't this really just be a few guys with piloting experience, a knife, and a willingness to die?
Well, I think all the evidence suggests that there was a major conspiracy. For example, just taking flying lessons. Everybody's talking about these Florida flying schools. Those are quite expensive, and the fact, if it does prove that, as the facts do prove out, that they were in training down there, this suggests somebody must have been funding these individuals.
Can anyone take this kind of training?
Oh, absolutely. It's very expensive, is my point, and so somebody had to be sponsoring it. And if it turns out there's several of these pilot hijackers were in fact being trained down there, that would suggest that there must be some coordination going on. I think the other thing that everybody has pointed to is the timing. I believe that 2 of the hijackings took place approximately 50 seconds apart. So this suggests a very well-coordinated procedure. And another thing that I do think that will have to change is the training that the air crews get, both the cockpit crews and the cabin crews, the pilots and the flight attendants, on how you deal with hijackers. Up until yesterday, the basic procedure was to cooperate with them, take them where they want to go, let the FBI deal with this. Of course, no one had faced this kind of hijacking in the States, at least not to my knowledge. So obviously the crews probably had no clue and were, in fact, probably following procedures on how we previously worked with hijackers. And, of course, the whole idea is to prevent any harm to the passengers. No one knew that the hijackers were intent on killing all the passengers. So it may well be that we'll have to re-examine that kind of training. And another thing that I do know was proposed in the past was actually armoring or bulletproofing the cabin door, actually redesigning it such that it would prevent anybody from gaining forced entry to the cockpit in flight. That suggestion was dropped because of the fact that we have a lot more crashes than we do hijacking, and of course if you did that, it'd be difficult to rescue the pilots in a crash situation. So all these things are going to have to be re-examined in light of what's happened yesterday.
And what about the willingness, Dr. Deal, of the airlines to go along with these changes or these recommendations? I mean, are they going to have to be forced to do this, and is it going to cost money to do it, and who's going to pay for all of it?
Well, obviously, the traveling public, you and I, are going to pay the increased ticket cost to do this. I'm not the right guy to ask. Obviously, the airline executives and the Air Transport Association.
But you've worked with the airlines. How willing are they to adopt changes when the NTSB, when the FAA say, look, this is something you need to do?
Well, in general, they always look at the cost of this, and up until yesterday, I guess the cost accountants for the airlines decided this probably wasn't worth doing, and as far as I know, the FAA has not, in recent months, imposed a significant increase in the security measures. Obviously, everything changed yesterday, but my guess is you'll find the executives of the airlines willing to invest in greater security and quickly.
Let's talk for a moment about the so-called black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. How difficult do you think it's going to be to recover these boxes from the New York and Pentagon sites? And is it going to be more likely that they are able to find these boxes at the Pennsylvania crash site?
You'd think that the Pennsylvania site would be far and away the easiest site. I don't know much about the angle of impact, but the so-called black boxes are highly survivable. The problem, particularly in the World Trade Center, is the fact that they're literally buried under hundreds and thousands of tons of debris. I'm not sure. I was watching people remove some of that debris with shovels and stuff, and I assume that somebody has instructed the recovery workers on what these boxes look like. Obviously, they'll be very important, and particularly the one from Pennsylvania. There's a lot of discussion about the alternate target. I think if they did survive, and they certainly should be locatable in Pennsylvania, they ought to provide. They may provide some clues. Now, the other thing, these guys were significant enough or sophisticated enough to shut down the transponders, so they may have been sophisticated enough to pull the so-called circuit breaker that controls the cockpit voice recorder. If they did that, the boxes will be useless. But if not, they could provide some important clues on the targeting. We've all heard rumors that perhaps the Pentagon was not the initial target for the Washington-bound aircraft. And again, if they recover the cockpit voice recording box from the Pentagon, perhaps we'll hear a discussion as to just what that target initially was.
But there's no guarantee, is there?
Absolutely not. And as I said, if they did pull the circuit breaker or shut down, you can shut these boxes down in flight. If they were sophisticated enough to shut down other pieces of electronics, maybe they knew enough to shut this down, and that'll be unfortunate if that happened.
Well, maybe luck will be on everybody's side in this case.
Let's hope so, Laurie.
All right, Alan Deal, former NTSB investigator and FAA scientist, thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us.
You're certainly welcome.
Well, as you just heard Dr. Deal say, as investigators search through the rubble in New York City and in Pennsylvania, one of their goals is to find that cockpit voice and data recorder.
The so-called black boxes, which we talked about a moment ago, they could hold the key to a lot of unanswered questions.
So what exactly are they, and why are they so valuable?
The so-called black boxes are actually fluorescent orange, and by airline regulations, nothing else can be this color on any commercial aircraft. There are usually 2 boxes on each flight. Investigators consider both to be essential because one records cockpit conversations and sounds, the other records technical data.
The flight recorder is very good at telling us what's wrong with the airplane, things that are actually, the engine quit, landing gear didn't come down, something like that. Something that actually has to do with the airplane. That's the flight recorder's strong point. Voice recorder is very good at this operational, the man-machine interface, the crew, and how they interact with the airplane and decisions that they make.
The recorders are usually located in the back of a jet. That's because the most predictable point of impact in a crash is towards the front. Still, the boxes are made to withstand forces 10 times greater than a crash and temperatures higher than those caused by burning fuel.
Most of the cockpit voice recorders and flight recorders that we get look just like this. They look probably as good as the day they were made, maybe a few scratches and a few dents. Every once in a while we will get a recorder that has been smashed.
If it has been smashed in water, that is usually not a problem. Recorders retrieved from the ocean are kept in ocean water until investigators examine them.
It's the air that hurts the tape once it's been wet. It actually will start to rust. So we have them shipped here in water, and then as soon as we're ready to play them, we take them out of the water, dry them off, and then get a good copy of it before anything starts to deteriorate. We have had recorders underwater for upwards of 6 and 7 years, and they're just fine.
The flight data recorder, which tracks the technical and mechanical information, comes in 2 different formats. The first is a tape-based recorder, which gathers data on a 30-minute loop. The second format records data on computer chips and can compile more than 25 hours worth of flight information. It all comes out as numbers, calculations, or technical words and bits.
It's actually a waveform that is then, it's zeros and ones that our software decodes into numbers, and then we can bring it up on the screen and see altitude and airspeed and different flight control positions and pitch and roll and what the aircraft is actually doing. It looks like a strip chart with the lines moving across the screen.
At this station, flight data recorder specialist Cassandra Johnson examines a tape-based recorder. She has downloaded the data, and her computer software has made the conversions.
We're reading it out, we're getting good data, we have a graph of the incident or accident, and we will pass it along to the investigator so that they can see what the recorder is telling them about the aircraft. And the most important part is for them to focus on a certain systems.
What the recorder is telling them is not always easy to picture, so the safety board sometimes generates a data-based animation to help explain what happened. This one is from a 1999 American Airlines crash. An MD-82 was coming into land at the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas.
It was almost midnight, as you can see by the time up here. There were storms in the area, and the aircraft landed on the runway, proceeded to skid around on the runway, and then went off the end of the runway down an embankment, impacted a steel structure, and 11 people, including the pilot, were killed.
In that particular crash, investigators were also helped by the cockpit voice recorder. It revealed the pilots knew about the storms but thought they had a clear path down the runway.
And approach American 42, I know you're doing your best, but we're getting pretty close to the storm. We'll keep it tight if we have to.
Cockpit voice recorders give investigators a good idea of what the crew was doing when the incident happened. It can also paint a personal picture of despair and confusion.
Sometimes the crew doesn't have any idea what's going wrong. They don't have any more idea than we do what's going wrong with the airplane. They may say things that are just completely not right because from the information that they have, you know, that's their analysis of that information, and it's very difficult sometimes to do that on the fly when things are really going badly.
Vern Ellingstad is director of the Office of Research and Engineering at the NTSB. He says the safety board learns something new from every incident or crash.
Aviation accidents are a very rare event. It's a very safe form of transportation, and the predictability of what might go wrong in each of these kind of rare circumstances is very difficult. So we do recover a huge amount of important information.
Some safety experts believe it is not enough, and already the NTSB is considering whether recorders should have their own power supplies. In the crash of a Swiss Air jet, the last 6 minutes were not on the data recorder because of an electrical problem in the plane. The safety board is also thinking about placing video cameras in the cockpit. Still, investigators believe that nothing provides as much information as the so-called black boxes. They are the key, say the experts, to piecing together what happened. In Washington, David Schuster, Fox News.
It is almost 2 a.m. on the East Coast, and still there is new information that continues to come in on this story. We want to show you a picture of the LA Times website. And look at that man on the left-hand side. He may be And this may be the very first picture of one of the pilots who commandeered, hijacked one of those planes that caused so much despair and devastation. His name is Amanullah Atta Mohammed, and this is a man who apparently paid $10,000 to go to a flight school, the Huffman Aviation International Flight School, down in Venice, Florida, a story that we've been telling you about throughout the day.
And the Huffman School is one of 3 flight schools in Florida that the FBI has been looking into. They've been asking for information about the students who were passengers, and apparently, according to the LA Times, this man who you're looking at, Amanullah Atta Mohammed, paid $10,000 along with another fella to attend this Huffman International Flight School. And apparently, according to one of the folks who works there, he came in literally through the front door and claimed to be an Afghani citizen who entered this country from Germany. That is the claim.
Now, Rudy Deckers, who is the owner of Huffman Aviation International, again, based in Venice, Florida, said, quote, and this is according to the LA Times, they said they were not happy with another flight school, and so they obtained their licenses here and left, and they went to South Florida for jet training. He says they were normal students and worked very hard. They lived nearby and bicycled here every day. Deckers said that one of the 2 men said he wanted to learn to fly jumbo jets. That is a picture of Amanullah Atta Mohammed, and apparently he paid $10,000 along with another man to go to a flight school down in South Florida called Huffman Aviation, and this picture again comes to you from the LA Times. All right, we'll continue to follow this story and all the angles for you, but first we want to talk to you about the way that America's responded to this tragedy, because it really has been remarkable.
It has been. People talk about the spirit, the triumph of the human spirit, people pulling together. We're certainly seeing that in New York and in Washington and in really all over the country. John Dupree has more.
Once the jewels of New York's skyline, the World Trade Center towers stood up against terrorism long enough to save countless lives.
The plane came through, it took out a few of the exterior columns of the building and then set off this massive fire with the jet fuel. And fortunately, because of the perimeter tube system of the building, it was able to withstand the initial impact and allow a lot of people to get out.
Other buildings would have toppled immediately, but the towers remained upright for nearly an hour, supported on the outside by closely spaced steel columns and struts, and on the inside by a second set of columns designed to bear the load of gravity. A double support system that withstood the crash, but not the raging jet fuel fire.
The girders or the joists that hold up the floors collapsed, and as those fell to the floor below, they overwhelmed the capacity of that floor, and we had was what we call a progressive collapse, which then continued on through the base of the building until it was a complete and total failure.
Most experts say tall buildings will continue to be made out of steel. What may change, they say, is the design of signature skyscrapers, the tallest and most exposed buildings. They may never be built in quite the same way.
It's not like we could ever design every building for this scenario, or should we? But after every major earthquake, for example, we change our building codes to improve our practice in the future, and I would expect a similar thing will happen here.
One possibility, designs that include more escape routes around the perimeter of the building as well as in the center. But experts say no building can withstand an attack by a pilot willing to die for a cause. The challenge ahead, simply finding ways to reduce the loss of life. In San Francisco, Claudia Cowan, Fox News.
All right, well, we apologize. Clearly, that was not John Dupree. That was Claudia Cowan reporting.
All right. Now let's take a look at the story from John Dupree about the spirit of America.
An extraordinary disaster, a remarkable response. It wasn't just New Yorkers lining up around the block to give blood.
They'll call you when they're ready.
In the first 6 hours after the attacks, 700,000 Americans volunteered to roll up their sleeves.
It's been overwhelming. You know, the outpouring of love and support from the community is really heartfelt.
This Red Cross Center has seen record numbers of blood donors. Many realize their blood may not be used by East Coast victims, but it doesn't matter.
It could have been me.
And if, God forbid, it happened here in one of our buildings, I sure hope people in New York would be helping us out as well.
I know it's a horrible, horrible thing, but it's nice to be part of sort of a community of people who are really willing to help.
The crisis has sparked an explosion of patriotism as Americans rally around the flag.
Flag and banner, may I help you?
This store sold 200 Star-Spangled Banners before noon Wednesday.
The United States flag represents freedom, represents the lives that have been lost for our freedom, for our independence.
Americans want to do something, anything, to help and to show their support for the victims.
But just take 15 seconds starting right now, and just a quick moment of silence.
1,500 radio stations went silent at 8:42 a.m., 24 hours after the first plane struck. Churches, synagogues, and mosques report enormous turnout at special worship services. Religious and civic groups are raising countless dollars through money drives, all in response to an act of violence meant to terrorize, but one which in its aftermath seems to have galvanized Americans. In Los Angeles, John Dupree, Fox News.
The last time I spoke to her, she told me the plane had gone into the building and she was gonna leave. Then she spoke to my cousin 10 minutes later and she was still in the building, but I know she made it out because she's on the safe list that they have. That was yesterday. We still haven't heard from her. We don't know if she's in a hospital. We just want to know what's going on. I can't talk.
Families waiting, hoping, praying for any news about their loved ones.
While rescue workers are racing against the clock in the fading hope that survivors may still be found among the wreckage that once was the World Trade Center. It's 2 a.m. in the east, 11 p.m. in the west. I'm Rick Fulbaum.
And I'm Lori Dew, and thank you so much for joining Fox News' special coverage of the attack on America.
We want to give you a recap on all the latest in the terrorist attacks. After threats were called in, the NYPD says that the threat to the Empire State Building, which happened just a few hours ago, is actually a false alarm. You're looking at a darkened Empire State Building there, but a Port Authority source says that there may be as many as 20,000 dead and injured down near the World Trade Center.
We're also learning that just a couple of weeks ago, American Airlines issued a memo to its employees to be on alert for imposter pilots. This after an American Airlines crew had their rooms broken into and only their uniforms and ID badges stolen. The feds are looking into this, saying it may have something to do with the hijackings. And law enforcement officials say the flight manifests from the 4 hijacked planes have been the most productive avenue so far in tracking down the terrorists and their supporters. But of course, the main focus remains on the search for survivors. Rescue workers continue their hourly vigil, digging through the rubble to try and recover survivors, but mostly victims from Tuesday morning's attacks.
Fox team coverage begins now near Ground Zero in New York City with Rick Leventhal. Hi, Rick.
Rick, Lori, we have a steady flow of large trucks rolling out of the site here. Many of these trucks loaded with large chunks of debris, steel, rock, that sort of thing. There's another one going by right now. We can see hanging over the sides chunks of metal and pieces of the World Trade Center as it's being removed by heavy equipment in there, and hundreds of workers on site going through that rubble, using torches to cut through the steel girders and trying to separate the large pieces, ensuring that there are no victims in there, and then picking up those pieces and clearing them out so they can try and get deeper into the pile and hopefully find some more survivors in there. We're hearing scattered reports that they might actually be getting some kind of cell phone contact from people still trapped in there, unconfirmed reports at this point, I should say. But certainly the work is continuing here, which is good news because of the fact that the work was suspended late this afternoon after fears erupted that perhaps more buildings might collapse. 3 buildings right across the street from the Twin Towers, 1 Liberty Plaza, the World Financial Center, and 90 West, which is a historic building which was built back in 1907. All 3 of them showing signs of structural failure, all 3 of them concerning people on site that they might in fact collapse. One of them, an office tower more than 50 stories high. I spoke to witnesses who saw one of those buildings swaying, claims to have seen smoke coming from the bottom and the top of that building. And right after the remains of the South Tower collapsed here just after 5 o'clock, and those other buildings began to show signs that they too might come down, hundreds of workers who were on scene literally fled the area. They came running down the street. Police officers pushed everyone back, including the media, clearing the area, trying to make sure that no more people would be hurt out here. Those buildings have not come down yet, but it's still likely or certainly possible that they will, and if they don't fall down, some of them, if not all of them, may be taken down because of fears that they are not structurally sound. Again, the work continuing at the site behind me, a grisly task, a monumental task, one that will take a very, very long time to complete.
Rick, as you check your pager there, I know that there have been other complications for the rescue workers and actually for you as well. There are particles that are flying through the air, debris from the World Trade Center that may contain some pretty hazardous stuff.
Yeah, we're told there's asbestos in the air out here, and we're all trying to wear our masks as much as possible and still get the job done. We don't know how thick the asbestos is and how great the threat is, but it's definitely unpleasant breathing and just being out here in this air. Most of the workers out here are wearing masks. Some of them are wearing gas masks as well.
Rick Leventhal down near Ground Zero. Rick, thanks very much. All right, now let's get an update on the rescue efforts that are going on at the Pentagon.
And for that, we go live to Fox's David Schuster, who is standing by with the latest. And David, what is going on there at 2 a.m. Thursday morning?
Well, Lori, they've got a lot of floodlights on the south side of the Pentagon. The effort seems to be to try to shore up some of the beams and some of the supports that are described as incredibly unstable. A number of rescue crews have said that it's simply unsafe to go very far into the crevice that was created by the explosion yesterday. They hope to start going in tomorrow, but in the meantime, they're trying to shore up some of the structure to make it a little safer for the crews to go in. At dusk on Wednesday, some of the firefighters unfurled a giant flag on the south side of the Pentagon. There had been smaller flags that had been placed over the last 36 hours, but this was intended as a symbol to show that despite all the death and destruction and the damage, that nonetheless they were going to show their pride. This came, ironically, just a couple of minutes before President Bush came to the Pentagon. The president himself wanted to see some of the destruction and thank a number of the rescue crews for their efforts. The president went one by one, shaking dozens of hands of the crews who've been out here literally 24 hours in a row. The president stood after shaking some of the hands. He looked at some of the damage himself. He was very solemn, we are told, and stared at some of the damage and said that a lot of this made him very angry. By all accounts, it has been rough going for a lot of the fire and rescue crews that are here at the Pentagon. Firefighters describe some of the structural damage as worse than what some of these same very firefighters saw in Oklahoma City. And the death toll here is expected to be about the same, if not higher. Already 80 bodies have been pulled out of the wreckage, but they are expecting the death toll eventually to go above 200. There were 64 passengers on that jetliner, and the Pentagon says this evening that there are approximately 150 military and civilians that are missing from the Pentagon. However, things have changed here for the good at the Pentagon. The parking lots were filled this afternoon. Workers have been able to go to the north side of the Pentagon that had been filled with smoke for much of the day, and the lights are on in a great deal of the Pentagon. So while work continues here on the south side, the military establishment getting its act back together in most of the rest of the building. Rick and Lori?
David Schuster reporting live from the Pentagon. Thanks very much, David. Well, investigators remarkably are quickly making headway in identifying the hijackers behind yesterday's terrorist attacks.
Fox's Todd Connor is live now down in Fox Central with the details of the extent of this operation. Todd?
Yeah, a little bit of late-breaking news for you too, Rick and Lori. Authorities have now identified a team of as many as 50 people who helped carry out the terrorist attacks on the U.S. The L.A. Times reporting in Thursday's editions that a source familiar with the investigation tells them that 40 of these 50 men have been accounted for, including those who died in the attacks, but that 10 are still on the loose. Now, the man you're about to see here on the video from the L.A. Times website Amanullah Atta Muhammad is believed to have been enrolled in a Florida flight training school at one time, and according to a detective in the Venice, Florida Police Department, FBI agents identified him as one of the men who flew the hijacked jets. Now, all day from Florida to Boston, FBI agents armed with guns and search warrants looked for leads into who's behind these attacks. At the Westin Hotel, for instance, as you can see here, 3 people were taken into custody, but as we were told later, those 3 people were released. Now, 2 of the flying bombs that struck the World Trade Center towers came out of Boston's Logan International Airport, an airport which is now beefing up its security. This is where authorities also found a rental car with flight training manuals they believed was left behind by the hijackers. Meanwhile, down in Florida, 400 FBI agents are checking out a few of those flight training schools, including Embry-Riddle, which you see here, trying to determine if the killer pilots got their training there. The man we showed you before, Mr. Muhammad, he apparently had trained at the Huffman Aviation School. So, right now, police very busy. Again, the LA Times reporting that 40 of the 50 men police and authorities believe was involved in these attacks have been accounted for. 10, according to this story, remain at large. By the way, in the hours immediately after the assaults, they're reporting agents found in cars and apartments up and down the East Coast, they found suicide notes in New York that some of the hijackers wrote for their parents. That, according to the LA Times. Pretty dramatic stuff coming out in today's editions. Lori, Rick, back to you.
All right, Todd Connor, thanks very much. Afghanistan, which is apparently where Osama bin Laden has his hideout. They're bracing for U.S. retaliation there, but its radical rulers there, the Taliban, are still denying that the fugitive terrorist had a hand in the American attacks.
Fox's Greg Palcott is live from Pakistan with the latest. And Greg, this is some preliminary information that we're getting in, but wondering if you can comment. Have you heard anything about the Taliban placing Osama bin Laden under house arrest?
Yeah, Lori, Rick, we're here in Islamabad, Pakistan, right next to Afghanistan, so we're hearing whatever we can hear from inside Afghanistan, and apparently the Taliban regime is knocking down those reports. There had been reports earlier today that Osama bin Laden and some of his top colleagues had been placed under house arrest by the Taliban regime. In fact, the Taliban government, through a spokesman of theirs, the Taliban regime says that they have not done that, that he has done nothing wrong, that they wouldn't want to do that anyway. In fact, in the past day or so, the Taliban regime has been denying that Osama bin Laden is responsible for the attacks Tuesday in the United States. They say that he is cut off from communication to the outside world, that they are aware of his whereabouts, and so there is no way that he could be involved. However, this is something that they've been saying for a long time. They've been saying, yes, we're happy to hand this man over to the United States if you provide evidence of any terror attacks. We haven't seen that evidence. We're not handing him over. Taliban itself, however, is apparently feeling a bit vulnerable also this morning. There are reports, just want to underscore that, reports that the leadership of the Taliban regime is moving away from its headquarters, especially in the southern part of Afghanistan, in Kandahar, where they are based. They are perhaps remembering the 1998 U.S. raids against Afghanistan and bases of Osama bin Laden there, that in response to the bombings of the U.S. embassies in East Africa, those bombings were linked to Osama bin Laden. Also concerns about retaliation among the international community in Afghanistan, the UN, NGO, others pulling out their foreign nationals, 80 from the UN alone, coming out yesterday and today. They're coming back here to Islamabad. They're worried about a possible U.S. strike and, of course, any retaliation against foreigners. Here in Pakistan this morning, the new U.S. ambassador, Wendy Chamberlain, will be U.S. ambassador, will be presenting her credentials to the Pakistan president. There is a lot of pressure also on this man, Pakistan, the principal backer of the Taliban. Some say, some charge that indirectly the Pakistan government is also helping Osama bin Laden. Pakistan president, for his part, says that he will cooperate with anything the United States wants to do in its efforts to rout out this terrorism. Now, one American official here I was speaking to this morning said to me, first of all, the link has not yet been made to Osama bin Laden, and I think that's something we should all remember. We have not made conclusively that link yet. However, if that link is made, he also wanted to say that it's not just one man. It's not just Osama bin Laden. He is the head of a network called Al-Qaeda, and that means a lot of different groups of various nationalities that could be involved in this attack. And I think we're seeing that now as the investigations are turning up individuals of various nationalities who could be suspects in these attacks. Anyway, this is our view from Islamabad, Pakistan. Things could be heating up here in the days to come. Rick, Lori.
Greg Palcott, thanks very much, Greg. Greg joining us on the phone from Pakistan. Tuesday's assaults on the World Trade Center Tower and the Pentagon, the worst attacks of their kind in history.
And indeed, so many questions remain. And now joining us to perhaps shed some light on what is happening now, we're joined by William Daley, a former FBI investigator who now runs Control Risks Group. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, Bill.
All right, thanks for having me in.
And, you know, we're hearing these reports that Osama bin Laden may be under house arrest, and you heard Greg Palcott reporting that some of the rulers of the Taliban may be leaving their posts. What do you make of all this?
Well, first of all, I think there's a couple of ploys underfoot here. We saw the same thing go on in Libya when we were looking for the accused masterminds behind the downing of Pan Am 103, when they said they're here, and until you can prove that they are responsible for it, we're going to keep them here. We'll hold on to them. You know, so we start to have this positioning by which maybe it gives people some time, some distance, puts maybe the United States in a very difficult position, maybe internationally, to start saying, well, they're going to hand him over to you, then, you know, why are you going after him? But I think we have to look beyond this and realize that they're really just ploys, and they're really just moves to be able to put things off a little bit longer.
Bill, one of the first things that everyone agrees needs to be done is the information needs to be gathered. We need to figure out exactly who is responsible for this before there's any kind of retaliatory attack. So the information gathering has already begun, but from your standpoint and with your area of expertise, how is that done? What's going on right now inside the FBI? We saw the storming of the hotels in Boston today. How is all of this information being gathered, and how is the work being done?
Well, Rick, as they've said, this is the largest investigation that they've had, that they've ever done. And I can only imagine, because I know some of the people that are there, the daunting task ahead of them.
And there's a brand new director.
Brand new director. Obviously, the Bureau coming out from concerns over some past issues that have arisen between files being missing and some other issues. But you can see that they are pulling together as an organized, unified effort and moving very quickly through this investigation. My thoughts when I first heard about this, and actually saw it here when I was in the studio when it was breaking, was that this has such a wide base of support that it's not going to take too much to be able to follow those footprints in the sand and start to put this together. Normally you start looking at crime scenes, and you use the crime scene evidence to then help you perhaps find people responsible. In this case, is that the people who conducted this had to do things that were more overt, which we're finding out now. And we're actually backing into the investigation from eyewitnesses and other people coming forward and other information from manifests, which is helping move this thing along very quickly.
And it's looking like whoever was responsible for this does have ties to Osama bin Laden. Obviously, we can't confirm anything. We want to be very careful not to indict this man right away. But if it turns out to be, how do we get this guy? He is very tricky. He comes out when he wants to come out, but he's very well hidden, perhaps by the Taliban. So how do we get him, and at what point do you just start attacking places where he is known to have been in the past?
Well, certainly that's one approach. Is that one approach might be, to go after known places where he has been, and training camps where they may have trained people, places where they've recruited people. There's a variety of sites that U.S. intelligence already knows about from their investigation of the USS Cole, from the embassy bombing investigation. So there is a lot of information out there that U.S. intelligence has. The question is, where is he at any one day? We've seen that even from the bombings of during the Gulf War, is that Saddam Hussein moved around, and there were locations where U.S. intelligence thought that he was present, and he was able to avoid and evade, U.S. warplanes. So we can kind of see the same mentality when someone moves around. But we have to say is that someone like this, is that we will get him. We will get him one way or the other if he's responsible. and it may require some additional work and effort to locate exactly where he is, but I am confident that with the resources of not only U.S., but of other countries that are supportive of us, we will get him.
It's so strange here, if he is responsible, bin Laden, because it's not as though this is the leader of some foreign nation. This is the leader of some very widespread terrorist network with cells of people, and we're learning cells of people right here in our country.
Exactly, Rick. I mean, and I think the most difficult thing for people, for Americans to realize is that, you know, we have brought people into this country who we now are finding out had some records, had some association in the past with either him or other terrorist groups. We've allowed them in. We allow them to go for training in our country, you know, to go for pilot training. We allow them to, you know, go on, get jobs, and allow them then eventually to have this occur. So I think when we start looking down the road, we're going to have to look outside the box. We've been working very in the past with a certain set of values, a certain set of ways we do things. But after this, we all need to be looking outside the box in all the ways that we gather intelligence.
So what does that include? So what are you talking about exactly?
I'm talking about aggressive ways of gathering intelligence overseas, of perhaps looking at the way that we not only secure airlines and places of business, but how we also handle people who apply to the United States for citizenship or to reside here. There are a number of different factors that we need to be looking at here. Not suggesting we do anything in a knee-jerk reaction, but there are things that need to be done as we get into this new world. This is the war of the 21st century. This is different than knowing your enemy, you're looking him in the eye, he's over a bunker. This is people who are scattered, who are very smart, and who have networks connected by computers and satellites.
And indeed, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld today in his news conference called this a 21st century battlefield. Everybody's been calling this an act of war. The president is now weighing his options. We're using the words war, we're using the words battlefield. How do we play this war?
Well, that's the thing, Lori, is that we're on a really whole different playing field than we were in the past. Is that we're looking at multiple locations where these people may have been trained, where they currently reside, how many people are out there in total. It's difficult to assess how many people are followers. We've seen them commit horrendous acts between the USS Cole, bombings in the U.S. embassies. We know that they're intent on what they do, and they're also become very good at what they do.
We've been talking about this report that's going to be in tomorrow's Los Angeles Times that talks about a list of 50 infiltrators that authorities are searching for nationwide, and they've been able to account for 40 of them, which means that there are 10 who are still out there.
And we're going to see, I think, more of this. We're going to see this number grow. We're going to see connections reach out. I believe it's been suggested to connections of perhaps people coming through Canada, like we saw. Don't forget, during the Millennium period, we intercepted someone coming from Canada. Later on, phone records and other communications showed that there was connection to people in Canada and elsewhere here in the U.S. who were supporters. So this number will grow, and the spider web moves on out.
Very quickly, before we let you go for now, are we going to see a lot of tightening of border security between the U.S. and Canada and even the U.S. and Mexico because of this?
Well, it's difficult to say initially, but again, thinking outside that box and thinking about how we secure ourselves in this new 21st century, battle and war that we're going to be engaged in, we're going to have to start looking at a lot of things before we never thought we'd have to.
Indeed, everything has changed.
Everything's changed.
All right, Bill Daley, former FBI investigator. We're going to bring you back in the next half hour and talk with you a little bit more. You also were instrumental on redesigning security at the World Trade Center after the bombing in 1993. And we want to talk with you about that and much more in the next half hour, so we hope you'll stick around.
Will do.
Thanks very much. All right, well, President Bush told the country that freedom and democracy were under attack, saying these acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation, but they have failed.
And there are a lot of us who are proving him wrong. Folks showing what they're made of, coming together as a nation in support.
An outbound train early Wednesday, under the Hudson River and rumbling away from the devastation. Grief grabbing hold. In their gestures and in their faces, the sadness is plain. Outside the city, stillness. At 8 a.m., some of America's most traveled commuter routes are barren.
The bridges and tunnels coming in from all directions, linking directly into Manhattan, are shut down.
An uneasy calm.
Such a strange feeling now because of the uncertainty.
The morning papers say it's war. Some are sure of just one thing.
It's important to show you have pride in America, especially after something like this happens.
Stars and stripes showing up through the sorrow. To some, it's a comfort.
You're going about your business, which you have to do, but it's not the same, and we know it's not the same.
Mike Lewis will never be the same, now trying to organize a meeting of his co-workers.
People are trying to get some sort of scouting crew over to 101 Hudson.
They saw the worst of the worst.
The metal squeaking and bending and burning and bursting open, I mean, it was just sounds that I'm never going to ever be able to forget. And then seeing people jump out of windows and burning people, it's just out of control.
That's what makes America a strong country, is going through experiences like this and being able to rebuild and go on.
Everything that happened, the flag still stood, and that's how we can stand too.
Stand strong, he says, while we all take a step back and see what's happened. In New Jersey, Eric Lilligren, Fox News.
And rescue workers continue to search through the night for victims of the terrorist attack in New York City.
But from the rubble, heroic efforts coming to the surface, families and friends of victims remembering their loved ones.
The awful, ugly horror of these attacks is now. The comprehension, the absorption of them is well down the road. Learning the names and faces of those who died is an important step, because knowing the victims gives us individuals to mourn. Among the first to die in the attacks was 52-year-old John Oganowski. Oganowski of Massachusetts was the pilot of American Airlines Flight 11, the first of two planes that smashed into the World Trade Center. He was remembered Tuesday in his hometown church.
You wouldn't believe the feeling that you have inside when you're watching these events take place on television and then realize that it's somebody that you grew up with.
His co-pilot, Tom McGinnis, age 42, was also remembered in a similar service in neighboring New Hampshire. McGinnis was married with 2 children. They were only 2 of the 93 people aboard Flight 11. Among the other victims, David Angel, 54, executive producer of Frasier. His wife Lynn was traveling with him. Also on board, Barbara Olson, age 45, a frequent guest on the Fox News Channel. She placed a cell phone call to her husband, the nation's Solicitor General, Theodore Olson, during the agony of the flight's final minutes. She told him that the plane had been hijacked by attackers using knives and sharp instruments. Other relatives also received the same kind of desperate phone calls in the flight's final moments.
He said, "I want to let you know that I love you, and I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the air phone of the airplane."
Also aboard, Barry Berenson, the widow of actor Anthony Perkins. On the ground, even the rescuers became victims.
We lost the deputy chief of the fire department and the chief of the department.
6 victims, 6 of thousands, in an attack so brutal it seems impossible to comprehend. What we know is that the dead are young and old, men and women, girls and boys. They come from places like Stoneham, Portsmouth, and Long Beach. One of the most remarkable stories comes from aboard United Airlines Flight 93. Reports say a passenger, Jeremy Glick, called his family and told them the plane had been hijacked and that all aboard were going to die. Glick also said he and the other passengers were going to try to stop the hijackers from succeeding in their attempt to destroy a government installation. He told his family he loved them and hung up. Apparently, their efforts succeeded. Flight 93 crashed in a wooded area outside Pittsburgh. It's believed that their actions saved a Washington landmark. As the tragedy deepens, there will be many more stories of heroism and many more names and faces to mourn. In New York, John Scott, Fox News.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above.
This is a vicious attack upon New York. It's an attack upon America. It's an attack upon the whole concept of freedom and our way of life. And we cannot let these attacks succeed.
From the mountains to the prairies to the ocean, white with foam.
Our hearts go out to all the victims and to their families. It is a tragedy, but as the President has made clear, it is a tragedy that we are strong enough to overcome. Our spirits will not be broken.
We are, in a sense, seeing the definition of a new battlefield in the world, a 21st century battlefield.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
New York is going to be here, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to be stronger than we were before.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Fox's special coverage of Terrorism Hits America continues. The men, women, and children who have been killed and injured, putting a human face on these terrorist attacks.
Let's take a look now at one family whose lives have changed forever.
Tuesday began with a game of basketball for 34-year-old Michael Lynch. Then he went to his job at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of Tower 1 and called his wife. She hasn't heard from him since.
I would say it was about 8:30, and he just said that he was at work and he had finished playing basketball, he was there, and that he would talk to me later, and that was the last time I spoke to him.
What have the last 24 hours been like, and what's been your strength as you've watched events unfold on television and listened to what's happened and read about it?
Well, I'm just trying to be strong for Caroline.
Since the towers crumbled, Michelle Lynch has been keeping a vigil at her Stuyvesant Town apartment, surrounded by her family, including one-year-old Caroline.
It's a roller coaster of emotions. You have hope, and then you have no hope, and you just want answers.
But tonight, another evening is passing, and there's still no word from Michael.
He was generous and loving, thoughtful, and the best father and husband that we could ever hope for. We just hope he's safe and not suffering.
Well, the feds aren't wasting any time tracking down those responsible for the attacks.
Literally thousands of federal agents are investigating. Meanwhile, authorities are saying that more than a dozen hijackers, possibly several dozen, are linked to Tuesday's assault.
We're facing a different enemy.
As quickly as firemen and police rushed to the scenes of Tuesday's attacks, other state and federal law enforcement agencies were on the trail of those behind this act of war.
Immediately after the first report of a plane crashing into the World Trade Towers, numerous federal agencies coordinating with the White House mobilized their resources.
Just a day after the attacks, leads and tips seemed to be in abundance. Law enforcement officials followed up on hundreds of leads all across the country.
At those command posts and at a number of offices around the country where there are leads, more than 4,000 special agents who are assigned to assist this investigation.
Boston, at Logan Airport, where two of the airliners began their doomed flights, officials reportedly seized a car that contained a flight manual.
I want to reassure all New England citizens that your law enforcement is aggressively investigating this horrific event.
Also in Boston and nearby Newton, heavily armed police raided and searched hotel rooms, following up on tips that the people involved may have conducted planning, may have been aided in and around that city. A source told the Boston Herald that 5 Arab men had been identified as suspects, including a trained pilot. Near Pittsburgh, authorities say the United flight that went down there may hold some of the most valuable clues. Incriminating papers and records survived the crash.
They showed up at the door, showed us a picture of the man, asked us if we recognized him, and we said that we did recognize him, and then they just informed us that they were doing a search.
Florida, FBI agents focused their attention on flight schools. The question they're trying to answer, is this where the attackers learned to fly heavy jets? And in Washington, the announcement that despite all this destruction, our unseen enemy would have done more.
We have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks.
And amidst all the uncertainty, there is one thing for certain. American justice plans on working swiftly and surely.
Our spirits will not be broken. The resilience of this society will not be broken. We will find out who is responsible for this, and they will pay for it.
In New York, John Gibson, Fox News.
Well, from Main Street to Wall Street, the attack on the World Trade Center has rocked financial markets throughout the world.
Joining us now is Fox senior business correspondent Brenda Butner. And Brenda, some good news, I guess, out of Asia?
Yes, good news. Basically, the Asian markets have stabilized. They had a tough time last night, but the Nikkei ended up about 3 points today. And although that isn't much by percentage terms, we'll take it at this point. All eyes remain upon the very silent floor of the New York Stock Exchange and over at the NASDAQ. We did have a couple of markets overseas in Asia that were down more significantly. Malaysia was down about 4%, but Hong Kong ended up as well. Japanese exporter stocks were taking a real hit. Those stocks such as Sony and Canon, which export, because there's real fears that the terrorist attack on America is going to really precipitate a global recession and that exporters will be hurt quite badly. So that's why that is happening. I can tell you, however, that oil is stabilized. That had taken a big spike yesterday on the heels of the attack. And also the dollar, which went up quite substantially, has fallen from very extremely inflated prices that immediately followed the attacks. A lot of times money flows into so-called safe havens like the dollar in times such as these. But we've got about a half hour before the German index opens and then about an hour before London opens. So it will be very interesting to see what happens in Europe if they have the same sort of stability that we have seen overnight, which would portend basically some good times ahead for the U.S. stock markets, which will open at the earliest on Friday, the latest on Monday.
You talk about the risk of a global recession. Here in this country, we've been talking about whether or not we're in a recession. The U.S. economy is in a recession. And there are a lot of people I've been reading who are saying that this could just really put us over the edge.
Yes, we are on the brink. There are some estimates that say that this could take us down by 0.5% in terms of GDP. We were already just barely hovering above the flat line. The technical definition of recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. For many of us, it feels like a recession. If you see your neighbor lose a job, it feels like a recession despite all of these economists' technical terms. But depending on how consumers respond to this attack, if they say, I'm going to zip up my wallets, I'm going to hunker down, I'm not going to spend, they were basically the only buffer between us and recession. However, they very well could come out and say, I'm not going to let this get to us. We're going to rally around the flag and show the terrorists.
And in fact, it was interesting. And New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani only said this morning, go out, go to restaurants, go to the Gap, buy things. Keep your life normal as you can, and maybe people will do that.
Yes, get back to business as usual, which is exactly what the New York Stock Exchange is trying to do, and as well as the NASDAQ by opening up so soon.
So soon. Maybe Friday, probably more likely on Monday. How important is it going to be for the American people to hear that bell ringing saying, we're back?
It has tremendous symbolic significance, I think, and the Wall Street officials know that. They want that opening bell to be ringing out to the terrorists to say, Wall Street is back. We are not going to let you can take down our buildings, but you're not taking down our markets.
Brenda Butner, thank you very much, Brenda.
Thank you.
All right, we have been talking about 5 people who have been detained These are people that authorities are looking into as being possibly involved with the assault. We want to go now to Todd Connor, who's in Fox Central, with more on that. Todd.
Rick, thank you very much. As you two know, this investigation moving really at breakneck speed, and that's, of course, why we want to bring you up to date on the latest that we're getting in here at Fox News. The LA Times reporting in Thursday's editions that a source familiar with the investigation tells them that 40 of 50 men involved in this attack on the U.S. have been accounted for, and that 10 of those are still on the loose. That according to the LA Times. Our first look at a possible hijacker, if we can bring up the video from the LA Times website, is a man you're about to see. His name is Amnullah Atta Muhammad, is believed to have been enrolled in a Florida flight training school at one time, and according to a detective in the Venice, Florida Police Department, FBI agents identified this guy right here as one of the men who flew the hijacked jets. This according to the LA Times. Now all day from Florida to Boston, FBI agents armed with guns and search warrants have been looking into leads about who's behind these attacks. At the Westin Hotel, for example, 3 people were taken into custody by Boston police. They were later released. However, in South Florida, FBI agents searched at least 3 homes in southern Florida. One of the homes rented to a couple and their 4 children until this past weekend, we're told, when they abruptly moved. Investigators taking away bags of evidence in that case. However, at least 2 other homes lived pilots. One of those was taken into custody but has not yet been arrested. And I want to leave you with this. Also in the LA Times, they report that the attackers who carried Middle Eastern passports belonged to 4 independent cells. That according to law enforcement and intelligence officials. Again, that the attackers that have been identified have carried Middle Eastern passports and belong to 4 independent cells. Much more in the story breaking every minute, it seems. So Rick and Lori, we're going to send it back to you right now.
All right, Todd, thanks so much. Rescue workers in New York City working around the clock searching for victims of the attacks down in Lower Manhattan.
What a grim task that must be. We return now to our own David Lee Miller, who is live at Ground Zero in New York City with the latest. Hi, David.
Good morning, Lori. We have some new information. We've been saying for a while now that so far 9 people have survived and been taken out of this rubble. Now with me is David Silver. He is a Red Cross volunteer, disaster services, and he just left the site, and he can tell us firsthand that there are a number of people that you know for a fact who are still alive, trapped under the rubble.
Yeah, that's correct. Several firefighters have been dispatched to go underneath the promenade area, which is underneath both World Trade Center 1 and 2, with a battalion chief looking for, I believe it's 2 sergeants and 1 female officer and 1 civilian officer, 1 civilian person.
Now, how did you learn that people were trapped there? Let's start with the civilian. We talked about that just a moment ago.
All right. While you're working closely with the city, they seem to say things, not beknowns that you're around. And when you're digging for looking for survivors, this is what was said.
The civilian, though, how did she communicate with the outside, and in what way?
She communicated through her cell phone to Seattle and then back from Seattle to here, and that's how they knew that she was down there. She described Krispy Kreme and some other store that was down there.
Also down there, a number of police officers, and how are they communicating directly with the rescuers?
That was confirmed to me from a sergeant over here who I befriended, and he told me that communication was broke off as of today. That communication with those police officers were broken off.
What time today?
He did not mention.
So their state is one that we do not know now. We don't know how long ago since they communicated.
You'd assume, I would like to assume that it was because their batteries ran out in terms of mechanical devices.
They're talking using a cell phone.
Well, whatever means they communicate with, that's the means that they did communicate with the police to suggest that they are still alive and they're waiting for rescue.
And what is being done to rescue them?
Like I said, they sent down a battalion chief and at least 20 members of the fire department. Also, FEMA's going in through a different angle to see if they can extricate them from a different angle, because it's very precarious now that the buildings have fallen. There are 2 other buildings that may fall as well, or may be brought down, and they want to extricate these people before that additional weight is put on there.
Any identification, any names?
absolutely no names at all.
I know it's a very gruesome sight. Relate for me what it is you've witnessed during the last 20 hours that you've been here today alone.
A lot of people putting their heart out to commit themselves to doing what is right here, in light of what was done wrong to us. Gruesome. There are body parts which are being found, but that's it, not whole body parts. And it's up to the tasks of whoever, forensics or whatever, to ascertain who these body parts belong to. When you gather a body part, you gather as much information as you can. For instance, a belt buckle or anything nearby that may relate to the body, clothing, so that might help as to where the body came from or who that person may be. But without question, aside from all of that, I've got a gut feeling being here for 2 days, there are plenty of live bodies there, and I don't want to give false hope or anything, but I don't think that we've reached the location of where a massive amount of people are, and that's just my gut feeling.
How are you holding up, having to deal with this?
Just a little bit tired. It's encouraging to see so many different people here.
I've never seen anything on this scale in your work, of course.
Never. Maybe a building that went on fire and relocating families, but never nothing like this.
David Silver of the Red Cross, thank you for joining us. And that is the latest from here. I should also let you know that we're getting conflicting reports about how many people may have died in this blast. According to at least one source with the Port Authority, we heard that it was upwards of 20,000, but the mayor of New York, we know this for fact, has asked for 6,000 body bags to be delivered by the federal government to supplement the ones that New York City already has. Back to you.
All right. David Lee Miller with a ray of sunshine there. Thanks very much. Well, joining us once again to talk about what has been going on there at the World Trade Center and beyond is Bill Daley, former FBI investigator and the head of Control Risks Group. And Bill, again, just maybe a little ray of sunshine. Some people may be trapped under the rubble. You worked on redesigning security at the World Trade Center after the bombing in 1993. You know what kind of a structure this is. What do you make of the fact that there may still be, and it looks like there are some people still alive trapped in the rubble?
Well, certainly it's extremely encouraging news coming the heels of an afternoon where people said they didn't hear tapping anymore, that there were no more cell phone calls, there were no more radio transmissions, that this is certainly a ray of hope. And knowing that location the way that I do, and I do know it very intimately because I've worked in that area, worked on that project, worked in the World Financial Center, is that there are many underground areas. There's a shopping mall literally underneath the concourse of the World Trade Center between the two towers, and there are various sublevels. So there are pockets of space where potentially people could be alive. And I think this is very encouraging to know that at least there might be some possibility to get people out.
And yet it's like a needle in a haystack, isn't it?
It would be a needle in a haystack. It would certainly be a horrific thing for the people being trapped down there to know that they're down there, and also for rescue workers now to have to go through levels of rubble.
Bill, I want to tell you about a report that's just crossing on the Associated Press, and I know you haven't seen this, and our audience probably hasn't heard about it yet, but the AP is writing that in the waning days of the Clinton presidency, senior officials received specific intelligence about the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden and weighed a military plan to strike the suspected terrorist mastermind's location. The administration ultimately opted against an attack. I mean, this is really something that I guess, is it because we've got this executive order that was passed back in the 1970s that the United States is not allowed to go after world leaders wherever they are? I mean, I'm not asking you to go into the minds of the Clinton administration and the decision-making process, but that whole idea, is that really going to have to be rethought?
Well, certainly, Rick, that whole idea of prohibiting us from going after people who we feel are threats to our national security, you know, I believe has been something that has overshadowed perhaps some of the better public interest. I'm not suggesting that we rescind that order. I'm just suggesting that I think that's how people behaved. I'm not surprised that we did have some information as to where he was. I mean, it was even out in the press where we saw pictures of him at his daughter's wedding, or at least post the daughter's wedding. So, I mean, there are people there, people around who would know where he was, and I believe that at some points U.S. intelligence knew specifically where he was, but the question was, what would they do?
How likely is it that Bush would revoke that order, do you think?
I think it's very difficult at this point, and it's probably something that needs to be reflected upon post this incident. There are a lot of things that we're talking about here, whether it's policy, whether it's talking about law, whether we're thinking outside of the box as far as what we need to do to protect ourselves, need to be taken into context of long-term, what do we do, and need to be taken place in a more sobering time after we get through what we're getting through now.
One of the problems, according to this article, is when they were debating whether or not to go ahead with this military option was that the information that they had might have been stale at that point because he's someone that is known to move around so often.
Exactly. That could have been one of the difficulties. I mean, information intelligence like that sometimes lags, and even if it's confirmed, it can lag in a period of days or weeks from exactly, and at that point, you know, the person is moved.
Bill Daley, former FBI investigator and now the head of Control Risks Group, thank you so much for your expertise. We appreciate it as always. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. As investigators search through the rubble in New York City, the Pentagon, and in Pennsylvania, one of the goals is to try to find that cockpit voice and data recorder from each of the 4 planes.
The so-called black boxes, what exactly are they and why are they so valuable? Our David Schuster joins us again from the Pentagon with more on that. Hello, David.
Laura, good evening. Officials are convinced that the black boxes will help investigators piece together the crucial moments when the hijackers stormed the cockpit and changed the direction, the course of these aircraft. As the FBI sifts through the wreckage, they hope to be able to locate these boxes through their distinctive color. The so-called black boxes are actually fluorescent orange, and by airline regulations, nothing else can be this color on any commercial aircraft. There are usually 2 boxes on each flight. Investigators consider both to be essential because one records cockpit conversations and sounds, the other records technical data.
The flight recorder is very good at telling us what's wrong with the airplane, things that are actually, you know, the engine quit, landing gear didn't come down, something like that. Something that actually has to do with the airplane. That's the flight recorder's strong point. Voice recorder is very good at this operational, the man-machine interface, the crew and how they interact with the airplane and decisions that they make.
The recorders are usually located in the back of a jet. That's because the most predictable point of impact in a crash is towards the front. Still, the boxes are made to withstand forces 10 times greater than a crash and temperatures higher than those caused by burning fuel.
Most of the cockpit voice recorders and flight recorders that we get look just like this. They look probably as good as the day they were made, maybe a few scratches and a few dents. Every once in a while we will get a recorder that has been smashed.
If it has been smashed in water, that is usually not a problem. Recorders retrieved from the ocean are kept in ocean water until investigators examine them.
It's the air that hurts the tape once it's been wet. It actually will start to rust. So we have them shipped here in water, and then as soon as we're ready to play them, we take them out of the water, dry them off, and then get a good copy of it before anything starts to deteriorate. We have had recorders underwater for upwards of 6 and 7 years, and they're just fine.
The flight data recorder, which tracks the technical and mechanical information, comes in 2 different formats. The first is a tape-based recorder, which gathers data on a 30-minute loop. The second format records data on computer chips and can compile more than 25 hours worth of flight information. It all comes out as numbers, calculations, or technical words and bits.
It's actually a waveform that is then, it's zeros and ones that our software decodes into numbers, and then we can bring it up on the screen and see altitude and airspeed and different flight control positions and pitch and roll and what the aircraft is actually doing. It looks like a strip chart with the lines moving across the screen.
At this station, flight data recorder specialist Cassandra Johnson examines a tape-based recorder. She has downloaded the data, and her computer software has made the conversions.
We're reading it out, we're getting good data, we have a graph of the incident or accident, and we will pass it along to the investigator so that they can see what the recorder is telling them about the aircraft. And the most important part is for them to focus on a certain systems.
What the recorder is telling them is not always easy to picture, so the safety board sometimes generates a data-based animation to help explain what happened. This one is from a 1999 American Airlines crash. An MD-82 was coming into land at the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas.
It was almost midnight, as you can see by the time up here. There were storms in the area, and the aircraft landed on the runway, proceeded to skid around on the runway, and then went off the end of the runway down an embankment, impacted a steel structure, and 11 people, including the pilot, were killed.
In that particular crash, investigators were also helped by the cockpit voice recorder. It revealed the pilots knew about the storms but thought they had a clear path down the runway.
And approach American 4220, I know you're doing your best, but we're getting pretty close to the storm. We'll keep it tight if we have to.
Cockpit voice recorders give investigators a good idea of what the crew was doing when the incident happened. It can also paint a personal picture of despair and confusion.
Sometimes the crew doesn't have any idea what's going wrong. They don't have any more idea than we do what's going wrong with the airplane. They may say things that are just completely not right because from the information that they have, you know, that's their analysis of that information, and it's very difficult sometimes to do that on the fly when things are really going badly.
Vern Ellingstad is director of the Office of Research and Engineering at the NTSB. He says the safety board learns something new from every incident or crash.
Aviation accidents are a very rare event. It's a very safe form of transportation, and the predictability of what might go wrong in each of these kind of rare circumstances is very difficult. So we do recover a huge amount of important information.
Some safety experts believe it is not enough, and already the NTSB is considering whether recorders should have their own power supplies. In the crash of a Swiss Air jet, the last 6 minutes were not on the data recorder because of an electrical problem in the plane. The safety board is also thinking about placing video cameras in the cockpit. Still, investigators believe that nothing provides as much information as the so-called black boxes. They are the key, say the experts, to piecing together what happened. In Washington, David Schuster, Fox News.
Well, the World Trade Center Twin Towers were targeted back in 1993 and did survive a terrorist attack.
Yeah, that was a car bomb that went right into the basement, and luckily the buildings did survive. But Tuesday's assault proved too much for the world-famous skyscrapers, collapsing the buildings and changing this city's skyline forever.
Once the jewels of New York's skyline, the World Trade Center towers stood up against terrorism long enough to save countless lives.
The plane came through, it took out a few of the exterior columns of the building and then set off this massive fire with the jet fuel. And fortunately, because of the perimeter tube system of the building, it was able to withstand the initial impact and allow a lot of people to get out.
Other buildings would have toppled immediately, but the towers remained upright for nearly an hour, supported on the outside by closely spaced steel columns and struts, and on the inside by a second set of columns designed to bear the load of gravity. A double support system that withstood the crash, but not the raging jet fuel fire.
The girders or the joists that hold up the floors collapsed, and as those fell to the floor below, they overwhelmed the capacity of that floor, and we had was what we call a progressive collapse, which then continued on through the base of the building until it was a complete and total failure.
Most experts say tall buildings will continue to be made out of steel. What may change, they say, is the design of signature skyscrapers, the tallest and most exposed buildings. They may never be built in quite the same way.
It's not like we could ever design every building for this scenario, or should we? But after every major earthquake, for example, we change our building codes to improve our practice in the future, and I would expect a similar thing will happen here.
One possibility, designs that include more escape routes around the perimeter of the building as well as in the center. But experts say no building can withstand an attack by a pilot willing to die for a cause. The challenge ahead, simply finding ways to reduce the loss of life. In San Francisco, Claudia Cowan, Fox News.
And rescue workers have a long road ahead of them. They are just scratching the surface now of this rescue and recovery effort they're doing.
And even though only 82 have been confirmed dead, thousands are feared dead, and now we have an updated list of the victims of Tuesday's terrorist attacks. It is 3 a.m. in the East Coast, 3 a.m. in New York City and Washington, D.C., midnight in the West as we continue our nonstop coverage of the terror attacks against the United States. Hello, it is good to have you with us. I'm Lori Dew.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum. Here are the latest developments at this hour, starting with emergency workers in New York who continue to dig through the rubble at Ground Zero. The death toll is expected to be huge. So far, there are 82 confirmed fatalities. Also this hour, the Washington Post is reporting that Afghanistan, the alleged hideout for terror mastermind Osama bin Laden, bracing for an imminent U.S. attack. Meantime, the U.S. State Department is advising worldwide caution. The Los Angeles Times is reporting this hour that a team of 50 people, 50 may be responsible for carrying out the strikes. Also from the LA Times, FBI agents have found suicide notes in New York that were written by some of the hijackers.
We will continue to update you on the very latest on the terrorist attacks in a moment. But first, we have a breaking story to tell you about. A twin-engine plane carrying 16 Americans and 3 American crew members has crashed in Mexico's Yucatan state. All those on board were killed. The Americans were from the Seattle area. They were returning from a visit to Mayan ruins in Mexico and had planned to attend a Washington University football game in Florida. There was no distress call from the pilot before the crash. Once again, a twin-engine plane carrying 19 people, mostly American tourists, have been killed in a plane crash in Mexico's Yucatan state.
And now back to our coverage of the terror attacks against the U.S. New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani confirming that he has ordered 6,000 body bags to be brought to the city. David Lee Miller has more on the recovery operation from the site where the World Trade Center towers once stood. David?
Good morning, Rick. It's been now almost 2 days since the terrorists struck, and so far only 9 bodies, they say, have been recovered. Just a short time ago, live on the air, we talked with one of the Red Cross rescue workers, and he told us that at this hour, a battalion chief and 20 firefighters are now trying to make their way into the rubble because they believe that 4 people, at least 4 people, he says, are still alive. He says a woman has been in contact with her family using a cell phone in Seattle. He also says here that during the day, authorities have talked with 3 police officers who are in the rubble. He was unable to confirm, though, how long it has been since those trapped police officers talked with some of the rescue officers. Now, flying overhead, you can hear, by the way, it sounds like one of the jet fighters that have been flying above Manhattan ever since the blasts here at the Twin Towers. There were some very tense moments late this afternoon, about 5:30. The authorities here said that one of the towers, the southern tower, what was left of it, began to crumble, and they also feared at that time that 2 adjacent buildings were going to give way. The authorities then told all the rescue workers, fire personnel to move north up Church Street, away from the rescue effort, away from where the towers once stood. We were on the air live at the time. Our microphone and our television camera were disconnected, and for a while the rescue efforts were scaled down dramatically. But a number of hours later, it was learned that that was, for the most part, a false alarm. The buildings they thought might crumble were in no immediate danger of doing so. And at this hour, rescue efforts are continuing. As I said, they are frantically searching using dogs, acoustical equipment, and tractors, cranes, and whatever type of heavy machinery they could get their hands on to try and get to the survivors. But to a great extent, this is also a search and recovery mission. As you mentioned, the mayor of the city of New York has asked for 6,000 additional body bags. That in addition to the ones that New York City already has. No official estimate right now on the death toll in total. There are conflicting figures that are being tossed around, but one Port Authority official told Fox News that it is expected that the death toll could exceed 20,000. Back to you.
David, I know that one of the other things that's complicating the rescue efforts there are some particles and debris that are flying through the air.
That's right, Rick. Apparently, the particles you're talking about, according to some of the officials we've talked with, are asbestos. They contain asbestos, which is a carcinogen. And some of the National Guardsmen actually went around instructing us and instructing others to make sure that at all times we use some type of mask or a filtration system. So more and more you'll see people down here who are wearing these masks. And in fact, as soon as we get off the air, I will put mine on because it's really unclear how much asbestos there is. But I did talk to a doctor down here, And in his words, he said the asbestos level had been measured and it was off the scale. Back to you.
All right, David Lee Miller down in New York City. We'll let him put that mask on. Thanks for the report.
Well, it will be some time before America can attach firm casualty figures to this nightmare in New York and in Washington, but many folks are already mourning the tragic loss of their loved ones. John Scott tells some of the stories of some of those who are known to have died.
The awful, ugly horror of these attacks is now. The comprehension, the absorption of them is well down the road. Learning the names and faces of those who died is an important step, because knowing the victims gives us individuals to mourn. Among the first to die in the attacks was 52-year-old John Oganowski. Oganowski of Massachusetts was the pilot of American Airlines Flight 11, the first of 2 planes that smashed into the World Trade Center. He was remembered Tuesday in his hometown church.
You wouldn't believe the feeling that you have inside when you're watching these events take place on television, and then realize that it's somebody that you grew up with.
His co-pilot, Tom McGinnis, age 42, was also remembered in a similar service in neighboring New Hampshire. McGinnis was married with 2 children. They were only 2 of the 93 people aboard Flight 11. Among the other victims, David Angel, 54, executive producer of Frasier. His wife Lynn was traveling with him. Also on board, Barbara Olson, age 45, a frequent guest on the Fox News Channel. She placed a cell phone call to her husband, the nation's Solicitor General, Theodore Olson, during the agony of the flight's final minutes. She told him that the plane had been hijacked by attackers using knives and sharp instruments. Other relatives also received the same kind of desperate phone calls in the flight's final moments.
He said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying. I think he said I'm in the air. I'm calling you on the air phone of the airplane.
Also aboard, Barry Berenson, the widow of actor Anthony Perkins. On the ground, even the rescuers became victims.
We lost the deputy chief of the fire department and the chief of the department.
6 victims, 6 of thousands, in an attack so brutal it seems impossible to comprehend. What we know is that the dead are young and old, men and women, girls and boys. They come from places like Stoneham, Portsmouth, and Long Beach. One of the most remarkable stories comes from aboard United Airlines Flight 93. Reports say a passenger, Jeremy Glick, called his family and told them the plane had been hijacked and that all aboard were going to die. Glick also said he and the other passengers were going to try to stop the hijackers from succeeding in their attempt to destroy a government installation. He told his family he loved them and hung up. Apparently, their efforts succeeded. Flight 93 crashed in a wooded area outside Pittsburgh. It's believed that their actions saved a Washington landmark. As the tragedy deepens, there will be many more stories of heroism and many more names and faces to mourn. In New York, John Scott, Fox News.
You have been looking at pictures from Lower Manhattan where the search and rescue operations continue. In Washington, or actually in Arlington, Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area, it's quite a different situation there where they don't expect to find any survivors after the attack at the Pentagon. David Schuster joins us now live from the Pentagon with more. David?
Rick, that's right. They dropped in some listening devices yesterday and have heard absolutely nothing, so there's not a lot of optimism here that they will find anybody alive. The effort at this hour is simply to try to shore up some of the structures, some of the beams. Apparently they are sort of piercing down at a 45-degree angle, and there's great fear that at some point part of the structure may still collapse, so they're trying to build some support there. At dusk on Wednesday, some of the firefighters, in a show of symbolism, unfurled a giant flag from the roof of the Pentagon on the south side. They draped that flag then over the side. The governor of Virginia on Tuesday night had urged residents in the Commonwealth and in the entire Washington area to show their support by displaying flags, and that is a rallying cry that has been picked up on a lot of local radio stations. And driving through the Washington area, you can see flags all over the place. The flag at the Pentagon came out just before President Bush came down here in Arlington to pay his own respects to the dead, but also to thank all of the firefighters, all the rescue crews for their hard work. The president going one by one, very solemnly saying that he appreciated all of these efforts. By all accounts, it is rough going for some of these firefighters. Some of them describe the damage here as being worse than in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, and some of the fire and rescue crews from Fairfax, Virginia, who are here now, were also in Oklahoma City. And the death toll here is expected to be higher than Oklahoma City. Already, the fire crews have managed to pull out approximately 80 bodies. There had been some reports that the death toll at the Pentagon might go as high as 800, because that is the number that officials said worked in the general area where the jetliner smashed into the building. But several senior Defense Department officials, including the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, are downplaying that figure. The Secretary of Defense spoke at a news conference last night. Here's part of what he had to say.
We currently believe and are certainly hopeful that the number of casualties being reported in the press is high. As you know from your own observation out there, the work is still going forward, and we won't know for some time precise numbers, but from everything that we currently know, the estimate that's been widely reported is considerably high.
The Pentagon says that there are approximately 150 military and civilian workers who were working in the Pentagon who remain unaccounted for, and when you combine that with the 64 who are on the jetliner, they are expecting that the death toll will go over 200. There is a little bit of good news, though, here at the Pentagon. In the last 12 or 14 hours, a lot of people on the north side of the building have managed to get back to work. The fires are completely out. Some of the lights are back on. There are cars back in the parking lot now. So clearly some of the work here at the Department of Defense continues, as some of the rescue crews are hoping to get in and try to remove some more of the debris when dawn comes in just a couple of hours. Rick and Lori?
David, I know that here in New York, the feelings have been evolving. Of course, yesterday it was shock and disbelief, on Tuesday, and then things are beginning to shift and people are beginning to get angry. I'm wondering about the mood at the Pentagon and whether you can sense that kind of a shift there.
Rick, to some degree, although perhaps very different in the sense that a lot of the people who work at the Pentagon have served at military bases and installations around the world, and there's much more of a matter-of-fact attitude, I gather, here than, say, in New York City. A lot of people have been through bombings of the Marine barracks in Lebanon and other incidents around the world, so they're used to some of the carnage that, unfortunately, U.S. military forces sometimes face. I would say the anger comes from the fact that almost all of the workers here, this is not a battlefield per se, as a lot of people have pointed out. This is an office building that simply houses some of the computers and some of the people who deal with some of the logistics with the Department of Defense, and that's where the anger comes from. I think still there's a certain, in the military culture, there's a certain acceptance that U.S. forces will be targeted. And there had been some worries that at some point, because the Pentagon is essentially in the flight path of National Airport, that it wouldn't be that difficult someday for some terrorist, if they were able to commandeer an aircraft, to smash it into the Pentagon. So that fear had been lingering, but I would say that there is some anger, but probably nothing compared to what you're seeing in New York, Rick and Lori.
David Schuster at the Pentagon. Thank you, David.
Attorney General John Ashcroft is calling this the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America. And reports early this morning are now saying that 50 people may have been involved in these terrorist attacks Tuesday morning. Our own Todd Connor has been following this for us all night. He joins us now with the latest on the search for suspects. Hi, Todd.
Hey, Lori. Hey, Rick. We are getting new information in every few minutes, as a matter of fact, and especially since the morning papers are starting to hit the newsstands. The LA Times is reporting in Thursday's edition that a source familiar with the investigation tells them that 40 of those 50 men believed to have been involved in this attack on the U.S. have been accounted for, but that 10 of those men are still on the loose. Now, our first look at a possible hijacker, this man, Emanullah Atta Muhammad. He is believed to have been enrolled in a Florida flight training school at one time, and according to a detective in the Venice, Florida Police Department, FBI agents identified him as one of the men who flew the hijacked jets. This in a report from the LA Times. Now, all day from Florida to Boston, FBI agents armed with guns and search warrants looked for leads into who's behind these attacks. At the Westin Hotel, 3 people taken into custody, but those 3 people later released. And in South Florida, FBI agents searched at least 3 homes. One of the homes was rented to a couple and their 4 children until this past weekend, when we're told they abruptly moved. Investigators taking away bags of evidence from there. And at 2 other homes lived pilots. One was taken into custody but has not been arrested. The other one was gone. And as I said, Lori and Rick, news coming to us every few minutes. I was checking the New York Times morning edition. A couple of things. This first one, very disturbing. Officials said a group of about 5 men were under investigation in Union City, which is across the Hudson from Manhattan, suspected of assisting the hijackers. In addition, they say the men had apparently set up cameras on the Hudson River and fixed them on the World Trade Center. They photographed the attacks and were said to have congratulated each other afterwards. That according to officials. Not sure how they know they did that, but that's what the story says in the New York Times. Also, one last thing. A senior federal official said that American intelligence had recently identified several people believed to be linked to Mr. Osama bin Laden and his organization, and told immigration that they should be placed on a watch list to prevent them from coming into the U.S. Well, after a check following that notification, immigration officials figured out they had already entered the U.S., and it is possible that they were involved in Tuesday's attacks. Lori and Rick, back to you.
Todd Connor, thanks very much. And we're joined now in the studio by former FBI investigator William Daley, who joins us with his insight on all of this. And I'm wondering, because we've been hearing about these developments, and they seem to be coming very rapidly now, should Americans be reassured that the FBI and that investigators are coming up with these leads and are coming up with all of this as quickly as they are?
Absolutely, Rick. They should be reassured, and to know that a lot of this information may have been resident, may have been already in the files, and it's a matter of getting additional pieces of information where they can cross-reference through their indices and then determine how different people fit into the picture. And they're moving very quickly, not only on the ground, as we've seen, interviewing people, but they're also, from what I understand, going after records for a telephone company, from internet access records, those things that start to further spread out those arms of that spider web and start to link maybe other people out who were some way complicit in this, may have provided some type of support or advice.
We know this is one of the largest operations and investigations the FBI has ever handled. How big? What are we talking about? How many agents are we talking about?
Right now, reports are putting it at close to 4,000 FBI agents, additional couple thousand support personnel, about 1,000 or a little bit less in the forensic technical side, people to do analysis. We're talking about close to 25 to 30% of the FBI's assets, people, and equipment are being dedicated towards this.
Let's go back to Tuesday morning when we first learned about this. The President of the United States was in Florida. He was then taken to 2 other locations via Air Force One. Now, we learned what's now Wednesday, that the White House and Air Force One were targets of the hijackers, and now we're getting some of the first dramatic pictures. As you see there in your upper right-hand screen, we're looking at fighter jets, which are flying next to Air Force One.
Right, I believe there's only been one other time that fighter jets had been deployed to escort Air Force One when there was a conference down in Colombia, a drug conference. Other than that, these type of protocols are reserved only for matters of severe emergency. And it's one of the first steps that's available to the government in order to protect our leader and other leaders inside the government to give us the strength to go on.
I've had the good fortune of flying in an F-14 and flying very high, and I know what they're capable of doing. This is serious stuff, isn't it? I mean, this is about as secure as you can get, is it not?
Absolutely. As we all know, probably from things we read and movies, that Air Force One is a flying communications post. It's a mobile White House. But there are other places around the country, too, that people need to know where the president could go to and control things and command the military from if it warranted.
I was referring to the fact that it was being guarded, if you will, in the air by these fighter jets. So you would hope that it would be impenetrable.
It would be as secure as anyone would ever hope, or we would ever need to hope.
Bill, I want to ask you about Osama bin Laden, because he really is the one that a lot of people are pointing the finger at. We have a lot of foreign intelligence organizations from foreign countries that are all saying that bin Laden is the prime suspect here. How much proof is enough proof before the U.S. can go after this guy?
Well, you know, this is, now we're getting into outside of the court and judicial system, into the court of public and international opinion. And I think we're going to have to demonstrate to some degree, and I'm not saying beyond a reasonable doubt, I'm not saying with documents or photos showing him standing with people that we now know to be involved in this incident, but we would need to demonstrate something, both the American people and elsewhere, that we have done this, that is prudent, that this is the person behind it, and then when we take these actions, that we are then reducing our risk and giving everyone a better and safer place to live in.
So do you expect that this is going to take some time, days, weeks, months before there's some sort of a retaliation?
My sense, just on the way the investigation is moving now, that we're probably talking of days before we have something that provides us that level of comfort. What the government decides to do with it at that point is difficult to say, but I think we're moving very quickly along that train line towards some type of a connection.
Well, obviously we don't know exactly what is in store once it starts, but do you think now that Americans should begin to get into a different mindset? I mean, we're all recovering from the attacks of Tuesday. Do we need to prepare ourselves psychologically for the idea of America going to war?
Well, I think as we discussed even earlier for our audiences, that war now has become more of a symbolic word than what we maybe traditionally knew when we went to war after World War II, is that we are at war with terrorism and with terrorists. The thing is to define where they are, where they're being harbored, and to take action. So yes, in that regard we are, and I think that Americans need to know the government, I believe, will do what they have to do, and it needs to be done, not just in retaliation, but to give us a better sense of well-being.
And you would think that there would be public support for this, very different from conflicts we've seen in the past, such as Vietnam. I mean, this is affecting tens of thousands of people on American soil.
All right, and we've seen the leaders of Congress stand together.
All right, William Daley, we're going to ask you to stick around. We're going to bring you back to have further discussion about Tuesday morning's tragedy, so stick around.
All right, Lauren.
All right. Well, the country, and really the world, has been watching with disbelief at Tuesday's horror right here on American soil, but now stories of heroism rising from the smoke and the ash.
Leave the families alone.
What I have seen on their faces is grief and shock at what's happened. They've gone through a terrible tragedy and a horrible loss.
He'd called his wife a few minutes before the Pentagon was hit. He forgot. He didn't have a cell phone, so apparently he was on his office phone and called her and told her to turn on the television, that look at what's going on in New York City. And that was the last anybody heard from David. I've been told that he's not in one of the emergency rooms. The plane hit his office, the office he was in. They've not found him. And the Pentagon has announced that there is no hope for any survivors left in the rubble. There's always hope, but we also have to face reality to go on. It's tough. It's tough. There's two little girls, lovely wife, and a tough future.
He said, I want you to know I love you very much, and I'm calling you from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, I don't know who they are. He became distracted there as if someone was speaking to him, and he said, it's something to the effect of, it's true. And then the phone went dead.
Maybe he cut the fuel off or something, the fuel supply off, unbeknownst to the hijackers. I'm thinking he might have, the way it came down, apparently, looked like there was no power to the airplane. It looked like it came straight down, and it didn't hit whatever target they were going for.
He helped us grow this company from about 100 people to 2,000 people or maybe more.
And he gave his life for it. It's tough, but he did what he wanted to do. I hope that President Bush is the caliber or can come up with some of the backbone that Ronald Reagan or Harry Truman had and not back down from these people.
And we've been asking you to give us a call. We want to know what your thoughts are about all of this. And our first caller on the line is from Hawaii, and it's Lehua. Hello, Lehua. Good morning, or good evening to you, actually, in Hawaii.
Far away, all our hearts here are with the victims and their families. It's such a horrible tragedy, and it's terrible that it took something like this for Americans to stick together. Everybody down here wants to do as much as they can. We're giving blood and praying, and that's pretty much all they can do. But God bless everybody, and hopefully America will rise above this.
Lehua, thank you very much.
Let's go to the nation's heartland now. John in Wisconsin is standing by. And hi, John, what's on your mind tonight?
Good morning. What's on my mind? America's the freedom of the free, and we open up our arms to everybody. But these people are killing us as of what happened yesterday. I think that the people that are wanting to come into America to be citizens here, I think there should be more of that checked out of who's coming into our country. I think where the people that are coming in from other countries should be at the airports should be very well scrutinized. If we even probably sign up for coming to America maybe months ahead of time so that they can be investigated.
All right, well, there's sort of a fine line between investigating and going too far with that. But John from Wisconsin, we thank you for your call.
And let's go to Alabama now. And Dan, go ahead, Dan, you're on.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
We're doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. I tell you, I'm really upset about this whole situation. Calling from Alabama, and my heart goes out to all the good, fine people in New York City. I really feel really terrible about this, and I would like to take this opportunity to say that the folks in the South, and I think the whole United States in general is behind the fact that we retaliate against these people immediately, and we do not waste any more time.
Dan, thanks very much for the call. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your thoughts. All right, I want to check now with Brenda Butner, who's our senior business correspondent. She's joining us now with a look at how the foreign markets are reacting to the events over the last couple of days. Hi, Brenda.
Hey, Lori and Rick. Well, trading just getting underway in Europe, in Germany's DAX, the London FTSE, and Paris's CAC 40. And if Asia, where the closing bell has sounded, is any indication, the terrorists are not having their desired effect. The markets remain calm, cool, and very business as usual, with the exception of Malaysia and Taiwan, which both opened tonight for the first time since the attacks. There have really been only fractional gains or losses in Asia. It seems that Europe will also lack a bit of direction, as all eyes are on the NYSE and the NASDAQ, which remain silent, closed until the earliest on Friday or the latest on Monday, when trading will commence. Right out of the gate, the DAX, or the Frankfurt market, jumped almost 1%, but observers expect another volatile session. Yet over there, as here, those in the financial community have much more on their minds than dollars and cents or pounds and pence.
A feeling of total devastation, of a loss of one's family. You can't blame them. They've known and dealt with these people now, many of them for up to 20 years, certainly between 5 and 20 years. Speak to them every day across the line in New York, work with them, trade with them, cooperate with them. They're family. And one day they're there and the next day they're not.
But what you're also looking at in terms of amongst the people who've unfortunately been killed are the brightest crop of their generation.
Very true, and words we are hearing again and again as many on Wall Street await word of their friends and colleagues as the rescue effort continues hand by hand, as you're watching live now. Lori, Rick?
Brenda, thank you very much.
And now we want to take a few moments to get you caught up on the latest news that we have for you at 3:30 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. Here are the very latest developments. As you saw a moment ago, emergency workers continue to dig through the rubble at ground zero, literally hand by hand, a bucket brigade, if you will, continuing throughout the hours, as they have been doing for almost 48 hours now. The death toll expected to be enormous, into the thousands. 82 deaths have been confirmed so far at the World Trade Center location. In other developments, there are reports that Afghanistan is bracing for an imminent U.S. attack. Meantime, the U.S. State Department is advising worldwide caution. And the Los Angeles Times is reporting that a team of 50 people could be responsible for carrying out these attacks. Also from the L.A. Times, FBI agents have apparently found suicide notes in New York that were written by some of the hijackers.
There are so many tragic stories that have been repeated throughout the New York City area. Somebody wakes up and brushes their teeth and goes to work on Tuesday morning, just like they always do, except a lot of people never came home. Dave Price of Fox News station WNYW here in New York City tells of one such story.
Tuesday began with a game of basketball for 34-year-old Michael Lynch. Then he went to his job at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor of Tower 1 and called his wife. She hasn't heard from him since.
I would say it was about 8:30, and he just said that he was at work and he had finished playing basketball, he was there, and that he would talk to me later, and that was the last time I spoke to him.
What have the last 24 hours been like, and what's been your strength as you've watched events unfold on television and listened to what's happened and read about it?
Well, I'm just trying to be strong for Caroline.
Since the towers crumbled, Michelle Lynch has been keeping a vigil at her Stuyvesant Town apartment, surrounded by her family, including one-year-old Caroline.
It's a roller coaster of emotions. You have hope, and then you have no hope, and you just want answers.
But tonight, another evening is passing, and there's still no word from Michael.
He was generous and loving, thoughtful, and the best father and husband that we could ever hope for. We just hope he's safe and not suffering.
We do too. Tuesday's terror attacks are catastrophic enough for the adult victims, but many who died left little ones who will grieve for them, and other children unable to understand what happened. Julia Chavez visited a New Jersey school where the staff is trying to help these children cope.
This is how students at Brookdale Elementary in Bloomfield began their day. Under the American flag at half-staff, they had a moment of silence.
For all those who lost their lives in this tragic event.
The devastation and destruction at the World Trade Center was the topic of discussion in every classroom.
They tried to evacuate as many people as they could, as quickly as they could, but just think about how big those buildings are and how many tens of thousands of people worked in them and visited them every day.
Teachers tried to address concerns. Children were asking many questions about the tragic events in our country. Many went to their parents.
It's hard. My dad was in World War II, and he never wanted me to see this. Never mind her. It's horrible.
Mia Solero has 2 children. She says it's been one of the hardest things she's had to deal with as a parent.
You know, I have a 5-year-old son who starts nursery school today, and he said to me last night, "Are they going to bomb my school too?"
You never are comfortable with situations this horrific.
Since the tragedy can be difficult for young ones to comprehend, officials at the 11 schools in Bloomfield are offering help.
I'm really upset about what happened to the Twin Towers.
Counselors, social workers, and psychologists are on hand to help kids deal with the crisis.
We're letting the children know that they're safe. A lot of children were concerned about danger to themselves, to the school, to their families, so we're just reiterating that they are safe.
With these images seen on national TV, counselors say parents should monitor what children are watching.
You know, if the children seem to be disturbed by it, then don't watch it while the children are in the room. Put a video in. Turn on another station.
Julia Chavez, Fox 5 News.
All these stories coming out in the days and weeks and months ahead. Well, joining us again is someone who's been with us throughout the evening, former FBI investigator and Senior Vice President of Control Risks Group, an international security consulting firm, Bill Daley. Bill, welcome back. We love having you
Right.
here. You have a particularly unique perspective because after the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, you were instrumental in helping redesign the security. If you would, tell us a little bit about your role and how familiar you are with the World Trade Center.
Well, you know, Lori, and this is more from a very personal perspective.
Yes.
You know, we've been talking about this more as a for the public appetite and what they need to hear from a news perspective. But I was actually sitting in the studio yesterday, just shortly after the second plane hit, and sat here and watched on the monitors as the buildings crumpled, knowing very well that people who I know, who I've worked with over the years, were in those buildings, because they were people who were personally involved in redeveloping not only security but fire life safety. I would have to say, from a personal perspective, I know people now who are unaccounted for. I know people who would have been there next to the fire command people who were also now killed, and would have been directing people out. They also redesigned the way people get out of the buildings more quickly, easily, better lit staircases. So there are some true heroes here that people won't know their names, but they are the heroes.
Do you think because of the redesign work that was done, more people were saved on Tuesday?
Without a doubt. There's no doubt about it that the lessons learned from the first incident not only helped the World Trade Center, but also other buildings around the world. People from the Port Authority have gone out and spoken to groups and people who build buildings and service buildings to better understand the way to deal with calamities. Certainly nothing like anyone would have expected we saw yesterday, but those that broached severe terrorist attacks.
Bill, since you specialize in risk and controlling risk, what do you think is going on at other buildings in New York City and other skyscrapers around the country right now? We have heard that we need to be on the lookout and be alert for other potential attacks. So what's going on?
Well, the things that I'm hearing from clients that we work with, from just observations here in New York, is that a lot of the buildings have bunkered down. They've tightened up security where they're screening people coming into the buildings. Where I believe after this we'll be reevaluating certain aspects of how buildings deal with crises, how they deal with security. This incident that occurred is so far out on the spectrum of certainly things that have occurred in the past and things that buildings can deal with. But there are things day to day that are threats that are still going to be existing no matter where we go in the future that people need to look at.
And I just want to remind folks what we're looking at here, and this is literally a hand-to-hand bucket brigade that is going on. And you know, we've been showing this video for the last 24, 36 hours or so, and I don't want it to lose its importance. Look at what these people are doing, hand by hand, going through this rubble, trying to help find any survivors, and then the grim task of finding victims. And this is going on right now at 3:30 in the morning. Bill, if you would sort of tell us a little bit more about what these folks are going through, these very brave fire department workers and these police officers.
Well, having known many of them personally, people who are in the fire department, people in the police department in New York, these people are ones that put aside their personal safety and well-being, the well-being of their families. They're people working 24 hours a day, neighbors, friends of mine. People are out there digging in, literally and figuratively. And people need to understand when they look at these pictures, and it's difficult for those who may not have visited that area, that we are talking about, when we talk about square blocks, we're talking about probably quarter-mile sections that have been literally leveled. There are buildings that I've worked in that are now no longer standing, or those that are ready to fall down, and some that will have to be taken down because they were too close and they've suffered some structural damage. So we're talking about an area that I would imagine has to be totally encompassing close to probably about half square mile in total that's been affected by this.
What happens down there? I mean, you know, perhaps it's too premature to be talking about the future, but at some point they're going to have to try to decide what to do, what would be appropriate to do in this particular space down in Lower Manhattan, and what would be appropriate?
Well, you know, the first reaction is, you know, let's rebuild. Let's go back. We'll show them. We'll rise again from the ashes. Practically speaking, it may be something different. We may not need to do that in order to accomplish that same, you know, level of rebuilding. I don't feel as though if we built another tower, we would be at any more risk than we are today. We still have other landmark buildings in New York, places of where tourists gather, and other high-profile locations. But there may be a practical issue there. There may be one even, almost in a sense, memorializing those people who worked in those towers, that maybe we don't want to do the same thing over again. We don't want to have these try to replace what the towers stood for. And I think there's probably some psychological effect that people have to deal with, and that is any people working in tall buildings around the country and notable buildings. What does it mean for them? And it will take a while for a whole psyche to really readjust to this. And I think that's why we all need to be looking towards the future, towards readjusting how we live, work, how we handle our personal security, how we handle our country's security, and I think we'll then feel a lot better.
There's so much we can talk with you about. As I look at these pictures, I can't take my eyes off them, and we may have met some of these folks, some of these police officers, fire officials, you know, walking the beat in our neighborhoods. How do they keep going? I realize that you're not a former police officer, but you have worked with many of these people. How do you keep going hour after hour in something that is so incredibly serious?
I think what it is that they realize that this is their chance, this is their opportunity to help people who can't help themselves. And I think that's why people go into these services, is there's a bit of altruism, is they have a choice of going into, you know, business or something else, and they say, I'm going to go into a business that helps people. Certainly the pay isn't there, there's challenges there even in the city today with pay scales. So these people are doing it for the fact that they want to help people, and this is the true sign of people reaching out and helping their fellow neighbors. We have people who have come down to that site to help, from fire departments and rescue companies, from the surrounding area, from states far, far away. So it certainly is a tribute not only to people here in New York, but throughout the country who have literally helped.
And Bill, with your background with the FBI, the investigators, are they in there right now while all of this work is going on?
They are. In fact, once in a while in some of the shots you'll see FBI windbreakers out there. Knowing how they work, they would be documenting the area, photographing it, be looking at various pieces of evidence as they may feel evidence comes up during the digging. They're, of course, looking for certain things that may help them, whether it's the flight recorders or other information that comes out as a result of digging through this. And it's a daunting task, it's a dangerous task. Obviously they're limited by the fact that this is, as I said before, literally square blocks of city now in rumble.
William Daly is a former FBI investigator, currently with Control Risks. Thank you very much, William, for joining us now and actually throughout the night. We appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Really appreciate your perspective. Thanks very much.
You know, depression and despair could very easily come with this kind of a disaster, and that would seem completely appropriate for a lot of people, and the American people are a resilient one. John Dupree has this heartwarming story.
An extraordinary disaster, a remarkable response. It wasn't just New Yorkers lining up around the block to give blood.
They'll call you when you're ready.
In the first 6 hours after the attacks, 700,000 Americans volunteered to roll up their sleeves.
It's been overwhelming. You know, the outpouring of love and support from the community is really heartfelt.
This Red Cross Center has seen record numbers of blood donors. Many realize their blood may not be used by East Coast victims, but it doesn't matter.
It could have been me, and if, God forbid, it happened here in one of our buildings, I sure hope people in New York would be helping us out as well.
I know it's a horrible, horrible thing, but you know, it's nice to be part of sort of a community of people who are really willing to help.
The crisis has sparked an explosion of patriotism as Americans rally around the flag.
Flag and banner, may I help you?
This store sold 200 Star-Spangled Banners before noon Wednesday.
The United States flag represents freedom, represents the lives that have been lost for our freedom, for our independence.
Americans want to do something, anything, to help and to show their support for the victims.
We'll just take 15 seconds starting right now, and just a quick moment of silence.
1,500 radio stations went silent at 8:42 a.m., 24 hours after the first plane struck. Churches, synagogues, and mosques report enormous turnout at special worship services. Religious and civic groups are raising countless dollars through money drives. all in response to an act of violence meant to terrorize, but one which in its aftermath seems to have galvanized Americans. In Los Angeles, John Dupree, Fox News.
Well, information continues to come into Fox News Channel fast and furiously. There are some new developments in the investigation of who was responsible for Tuesday morning's dastardly attacks in Washington and New York. Let's go now to Fox Central. Well, Todd Connor is standing by. Todd, what's going on?
Well, Lori and Rick, Rita Cosby has been talking to her law enforcement sources, and she's passed along a little new information for us. Her sources tell Fox News that searches have now taken place so far at 20 locations in 6 states in this investigation for the suspected hijackers. The states are Maine, Massachusetts, Florida, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Virginia. Other states are expected to have homes and businesses searched on Thursday, including some possibly on the West Coast. Now, earlier we had heard that there were as many as 50 people involved in this attack on America. Her sources also say that they have some evidence that someone had been coordinating this attack, most likely from the U.S., for more than a year. And they go on to say that there are indications that at least one of the hijackers had a ramp pass, which would allow him to get on the ramp area prior to takeoff, which would enable him to get access to the plane, the catering service, etc., which would provide many, many opportunities, as you two know, to get items smuggled onto the plane, such as knives or fake bombs that they may have had with them. They also say some of the hijackers' passenger tickets were purchased by cash. Others, as many as 7, were purchased through the same credit card number. And one last thing, the source tells Rita Cosby that the Pentagon appears to have also been an intended target for the hijackers, that it wasn't an entirely last-minute change to hit it, although it may have been a last-minute change for that plane to hit it. Possibly when the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania could not make its target, which could have been the Pentagon, then the plane that struck the Pentagon, which may have been intended for a different target, possibly the White House. That's why that plane struck the Pentagon. So that is the latest from Rita Cosby and Fox News. We'll bring more information to you in the next few minutes or so. Lori and Rick?
All right, Todd, so many developments just keep coming in. It's almost hard to keep up, but we want to keep all of you informed. And we also want to know what's on your mind. This is a very tough time for everyone, and perhaps by calling in, it may help a little bit. And of course, you can always call us at 1-888-TEL-FOX. The phone lines are open. We'd love to hear from you.
As we take a look at a live picture of this bucket brigade that continues to go on at the rescue site down in Lower New York City. Our first caller on the line is from Pennsylvania, and Rose, you're on. Hi, Rose. Good morning.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, go ahead.
What I'm calling about, I guess, is I've had tremendous disappointment and building anger all day about the fact that these pilots were from Afghani. They were educated and learned all their skills to sabotage our country, right in our country. And I'm a little upset that our intelligence wasn't more on top of this information to make us feel more secure. And I know that you can't profile every single person from the Mideast, but we've been warned for years that these groups were going to come after us, and it just disappoints me with the technology that we have that our intelligence was not more on top of this through the websites and just through listening, watching these kids at these schools in Florida. What were they doing? What type of lifestyle did they live, and where were they from? What kind of activity went around them? I think these schools should be a lot more responsible for who they have come in to it, and what they do. They're just not responsible.
Yeah, Rose, you're not alone in voicing upset with the intelligence community. In fact, lawmakers in Congress are also very upset, and you can bet that when the new budget is agreed to, that there will be a lot more money devoted to the intelligence community and those efforts, which is something that we hear has really been scaled back on the last couple of years. That will obviously change.
We took it for granted. We would see this bin Laden's face flashed on the news, and we'd look and we'd go, I myself would look and go, what a fool, what's he up to? But we're safe. We don't have to worry about him.
And now we know that's not the case. Rose, thanks very much for the call.
Our next caller is Justin in Illinois. Hi, Justin. What's on your mind tonight?
Yes, I just want to give my deepest sympathy to all the ones that we've lost in this tragedy and all the ones that risked their lives to try to save the people that were in the rubble. And also, I've heard many things of many Americans attacking other Americans because they are of different race. I would like to say that we should put forth an effort to having all this stop, because it is not us that made this horrible event happen. It is the ones that had the thought to think as low as killing innocent people. And I know us Americans would never think as low as that.
Well, Justin, we don't know yet who is responsible, although it is looking like Native American people who are from the United States were not responsible for this. I can see your point of view and appreciate the call. Thanks very much.
Diana from California, you're on. Good morning, Diana.
Hi. I just like to say, just watching all the coverage with the people in New York, I am just amazed at their courage and their strength, and all the people, no matter what race or sex, coming together. This is what our nation is truly about.
And a lot of people would say, a lot of New Yorkers would say that this is what New York is all about. I mean, this is a town that has a lot of different kinds of people from all over the world, and you are seeing people's true colors as they volunteer and do whatever they can right now.
Yeah, I'm 3,000 miles away from it, and just feeling for these people and the people that I work with, and all of us just want to do something to help and come together as a nation and show these people you're not going to stop us.
Diana, thanks very much for calling.
Thank you.
From California to Florida we go now, where Fred is on the line. And Fred, what are your thoughts on this, and do you have any thoughts about how the U.S. should respond?
Yes. I'm ex-military, and I truly believe that every time we've gone to war or acts of war, we've never finished a job.
Fred, let me interrupt you and ask you what branch of the military you served in, and for how long?
I was in the U.S. Navy, and I was in for 8 years.
From when to when?
From 80 to 88, and then I was called back to serve in the Gulf.
And did you actually go to Kuwait
Yes.
or Iraq? All right, and so if you would expand a little bit on the point you were making about how the United States, you say, never finishes the job?
Yes, it seems like every time we get to the point where we can actually do something that will prevent something like this from happening, to us as a nation, to eliminate the mad dogs that are out there that we are going to war against. It happened with my father in World War II when we were at the brink of just, if they can't run their countries correctly, we need to take them and run them correctly. And we had a mad dog loose in our backyard. And what do you do with a mad dog? You eliminate it. And this is so upsetting. My prayers are out for every single American, and especially the families of all the people that have died.
Well, the President of the United States and his Security Council they're weighing their options right now, trying to figure out what to do, how to appropriately respond. Fred, I really appreciate the call tonight, and appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. God bless America.
Thank you very much.
The attacks were here on the East Coast, but sending shockwaves all across the country, and 2 of the planes involved in those hijackings were bound for Los Angeles and California. And Deborah is our next caller, and she joins us from California. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning. I'm calling. My son is 14 years old, and he was just totally devastated. And he has seen in our town that everybody has gotten their flags out and is flying them, and he wishes to issue a challenge to all Americans to please fly the colors, stand by what you believe in. Our prayers are with all of the families, the friends, the many people who are suffering now, the tragedies that are going to come out of this. We hope and pray that they can overcome it.
Yep, it's an excellent idea to take out the flags. Now is a great time to do that. I'm wondering, Deborah, how have you handled this with your son? How do you talk to a young person about all of this?
We sat down together. He was getting ready for school when this was occurring, and he came in and told me to sit down and watch this with him, and I watched it with him, and he asked me a lot of questions about it, and I tried the best of my ability to explain it to him. And I come from a law enforcement background. I'm a medically retired CEO, and so I kind of took the approach of trying to explain that the only thing we can do now is to help in any way we can and to pray for the people, all of the people, because we have to pull together. We're in an hour of crisis, and we all have to pull together and help in any way we can.
How has your son's school been involved in talking to the kids?
They've talked about terrorism, and it's hard for them to understand, exactly, what type of people that, we're going to have to deal with, because, terrorism isn't really something that comes up in school. It's just, you never think it's going to happen to you. So it's not, we've never really had to explain it to them because it's never really happened to us, such as this. So they have to go back and try and explain, who could possibly be the people that are responsible for this. And, once again, we don't have all the information, so
no, we don't.
We can't put a lot of blame on, one certain type of culture, people. We just have to wait and see. And then I'm sure that the president and everybody will deal with this in a professional manner and
Deborah,
take care of what needs taken care of.
Deborah, thanks very much for the call. We appreciate it.
Bye.
All right, our final call is Chris in Utah. Chris, we've only got about 30 seconds left, but if you would, tell us, you are a world away from New York, but what do you make of what's been going on here?
Well, actually, I don't really think it's fair, mainly for, I would say, the foreign people from Iraq or Afghanistan that are here, because what they do, they just actually laugh, and I think that they're using our freedoms to go ahead and live here, and then from there, they go ahead and just laugh at us for what's happening. And with the upcoming Olympics coming to Salt Lake City, we're wondering what's going to happen here when that time comes around, too.
We've actually got a little more time, Chris. I'm curious as to what specifically you mean by that.
Well, people are just wondering, questioning security here. What about Salt Lake City?
Right.
And, well, we're just questioning what may happen here. If this can happen, in New York, and there's no big conventions or anything big happening at that time. We're wondering what would happen, possibly with the Olympics and what bomb threats have happened in the past, what may occur around this time.
Right. We saw the 1996 Summer Olympic bombing and, of course, the terror in Munich in 1972 and the Summer Olympic Games there. Unfortunately, it is these kinds of horrible things are happening. Chris in Utah, thanks very much as we continue to look at this bucket brigade going on at 3:57 a.m. in the morning. It is almost a David versus Goliath situation. These people using their hands to try to sift through the rubble.
Our coverage continues, and right now we want to pause to show you a list of the latest names of people who were known to have died in the attacks against the U.S. this week, a list that is certain to grow much longer in the next couple of days. These are just the first names that we know of who died in the attacks, and we offer our hopes and our prayers to them and to their loved ones.
Hello, everybody. It is 4 a.m. in the East Coast, now 1 a.m. in the West, as we continue our nonstop coverage of the terror attacks against the United States. Hello, everybody. I'm Lori Dew.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum. Here are the latest developments at this hour. Emergency workers in New York City continue to dig through the rubble at Ground Zero in Lower Manhattan. The death toll is expected to be huge, but right now there are only 82 fatalities that have been confirmed so far. Some newspapers coming out this morning. The Washington Post reporting that Afghanistan is bracing for an imminent U.S. attack. Meantime, the U.S. State Department is advising worldwide caution. And the Los Angeles Times with another report that a team of 50 people may be responsible for carrying out the terror strikes. Also from the L.A. Times, FBI agents have found suicide notes all over the country that were apparently written by some of the hijackers.
We will have the latest on the terrorist attacks in a moment, but first we have some other breaking news to tell you about. A twin-engine plane carrying 16 Americans and 3 Mexican crew members has crashed in Mexico's Yucatan state. All those on board were killed. The Americans were from the Seattle area. They were all returning from a visit to the Mayan ruins and planned to attend a University of Washington football game in Florida. There was no distress call from the pilot before the crash. Once again, a twin-engine plane carrying 16 Americans and 3 Mexican crew members has crashed in the Yucatan state of Mexico. All those on board were killed.
All right, back to our coverage now of the terrorist strikes this week, and we continue our coverage. Mayor Giuliani of New York City has confirmed that he's ordered 6,000 body bags for the victims. Eric Shawn has more on the recovery operation. He is at Ground Zero, right near where the World Trade Center towers once stood. Eric, good morning.
Good morning, Rick and Lori. We did have more hope yesterday in terms of the search and rescue. Sadly, only 5 people have been rescued from the ruins of the World Trade Center just a couple of blocks behind me. 5 people, those are the lucky ones so far, but of course the search and rescue effort continues here unabated as 2,000 police, firefighters from a part of this area and from out of state, who are bolstered by many, many volunteers, are tediously, with difficulty, step by step, removing concrete, blasted stone, rocks, steel, iron, twisted metal and debris, hand by hand, piece by piece, in their desperate effort to try and find more survivors of this dastardly and devious terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. We have talked to some of the Red Cross workers here who say that there is one particular area where a battalion chief of the New York City Fire Department and some of his men perhaps may be trapped, but we have been hearing conflicting reports, nothing specific. What does give the rescuers hope are what's called voids. Those are huge areas, 50, 60, 70 feet deep, where concrete may fall. That could give people air pockets, could give people a structure to take cover, to protect them when that building came crashing down on top of them so horrendously. But what we have heard, the latest, is that the shopping mall underneath the World Trade Center is basically been cleared of people, that most of those people who are in the bottom were able to escape before the building came crashing down. There is a danger of collapse, we're told, from 2 other buildings here in the area. The World Trade Center was more than just the 2 towers. There also was a complex of other office buildings. One is the Millennium Hotel, which is right across the street, a fairly new building that may have been structurally weakened, as well as One Liberty Plaza, which is across the street on the west side, which is near the Hudson River. Those buildings apparently have been threatened by the fires and explosions here. There was some thought that they may have to be taken down at some point. No word on that, just that there could be a danger of collapse at that time. Throughout this early morning hours, the dump trucks continue to come by us, filled with the debris that is plucked from the huge gaping hole. The debris is then put onto barges and sent to the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, where FBI teams and NTSB teams are sifting through all the ruins. NTSB specifically, hopefully trying to find if the black box can be recovered in the flight data recorder to try and get some more information from the 2 airplanes that hit here, much as they have been able to try and gather from the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. But so far here, 257 police officers and firefighters are still missing. Mayor Giuliani has ordered 6,000 body bags. So, of course, the prognosis is grim, but there is hope that there still could be people obviously trapped inside that. And I have to tell you, we've been hearing from the phone calls this morning, this is the spirit of America. Many people here are doing it voluntarily. They're working 24 hours on, 24 hours off, trying to do the best they can, from the iron workers who just rushed in from Brooklyn on their own time to start cutting through because they have the expertise with the acetylene torches and such, to other people such as volunteer firemen from upstate New York who are doing the best they can to try and speed along this process. Back to you.
Eric, I know the air there is thick with particles, debris, and dust that are flying through the air, and I know you've got a mask around your neck. And if you need to tell me to stop asking you questions, then I will, so that you can put that mask on there, buddy. But I'm just wondering what kind of shifts the rescue workers are going on right now. Do you know how long they're in there? Because obviously we can't tell when they're being switched in and out, but obviously the same group of rescue workers haven't been there the whole time.
Well, it varies. I mean, some have 24 on, 24 hours off. Others are 12 hours on, 12 hours off, or as long as they can go. Then they go home and get some rest and come back again. Some people, of course, have been here since the terrorist attack on Tuesday morning. So that varies, not in terms of just a specific organized manner of scheduling for everybody. Let me just explain for this mask. It depends upon where the wind shifts. The wind now is shifting that way, which blows a lot of the smoke, which is still smoldering from the fires behind us. But then when the wind shifts around and comes back over us, you've got this thick, acrid smoke. It burns in your eyes and burns in your throat. Of course, there's also the threat of asbestos contamination, authorities saying that some asbestos had been released. So we obviously have these masks for precautions. And also, it is really an irritant. After reporting here yesterday for 12 hours, when I went home last night, lying in bed just thinking how it really gets in your throat and your eyes. And we're 3-4 blocks from ground zero. So think about the guys who are in the hall or inside the smoldering ruins, what they're going through. And they are volunteers, a lot of them, doing it on their own time to help try and save humanity.
And Eric, among the folks who are in there, it's not just fire and police folks, it's also the FBI. What can you tell us about any kind of FBI staging area, where they will go with any evidence that they may find?
Well, that's what it is, being taken to the Fresh Kills landfill in Staten Island, where then they shift through the evidence there or in the ruins. Let me show you here. You've got, this is basically the scene all night and all day. More new trucks. These are huge tractor trailer trucks, empty trucks, you know, just convoys going down, and these trucks come from various states. There are hundreds of them, and then they get filled up, and then they go back filled, and it's just a continual procession. These trucks happen to be from Connecticut, and that is how they're getting all of this material out of there. Yesterday, we were told that they had 120 truckloads. That obviously increasing now to hundreds and hundreds of trucks that are in a very coordinated effort coming down this way. They get filled up, and then they go off to the barges to be for the debris to be sent to Staten Island.
All right, such a difficult and very busy process. Eric, Sean, take care, and please put on that mask and take care of yourself. Thanks very much for the update.
Okay, you too, guys. Right.
Thanks, Eric. We want to go now to the Pentagon near Washington, where David Schuster is standing by with the latest on what's going on there. Good morning, David.
Rick, good morning. Very different scene here. The air is clear. The fires have been out for almost 12 hours now. The biggest challenge right now for some of the fire crews and some of the engineers are these sort of these beams and these structures in the Pentagon that remain apparently very unstable. Throughout the night, we've seen workers walking on the roof of the Pentagon, checking out some of the beams. We understand there are some logistical problems as far as some of the really heavy equipment that they'd like to take into some of the concentric rings towards the inner side of the Pentagon. There are sort of tunnels and paths, but they were never meant for the large trucks or the large equipment that they would like to use to be able to remove some of this debris. So a lot of logistical challenges here at the Pentagon. Late on Wednesday, some firefighters who were on the roof unfurled a giant flag off of the Pentagon. This was something that The governor of Virginia, James Gilmore, had suggested that people in the area, to show their support, their solidarity with the rescue workers at the Pentagon, might fly the flag, and so you had the firefighters flying one. A number of radio stations have picked up the rallying cry, and across the Washington metropolitan area you can see a lot of homes now that are also sporting American flags that they are flying. The flag here at the Pentagon came out just a few minutes before President Bush came to pay his respects to those who died here at the Pentagon, but also to thank all of the rescue workers, all the firefighters. The president, one by one, expressing his support, saying that the entire nation stands with all of those who are trying to dig through some of the rubble here at the Pentagon. By all accounts, it has been fairly rough going. A number of firefighters have said that the damage here, the structural damage at the point of impact at the Pentagon was worse than what some of these very same firefighters say that they saw in Oklahoma City with the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And the death toll here at the Pentagon is expected to be higher. 168 died in Oklahoma City. Here at the Pentagon, 80 bodies have been retrieved, but they are expecting that number to go up, perhaps more than 200. At one point yesterday, some media accounts referring to Arlington County fire officials said that perhaps the death toll could be as high as 800, because that's the number of office workers the Pentagon estimated were in this area where the jetliner slammed into the building. But since yesterday, a number of defense officials, including the Secretary of Defense, have tried to downplay that figure. The Secretary of Defense spoke at a news conference last night. Here's part of what he had to say.
We currently believe and are certainly hopeful that the number of casualties being reported in the press is high. As you know from your own observation out there, the work is still going forward, and we won't know for some time precise numbers, but from everything that we currently know, the estimate that's been widely reported is considerably high.
Now, just to put it all in some perspective, though, they are still expecting at least 200 dead here at the Pentagon. There were 64 on the jetliner and approximately 150 military and civilian workers inside the Pentagon who have yet to be accounted for. Rick and Laurie?
David, very quickly, I want to ask you about concerns that folks may have there about the stability of the building where the plane actually came in and crashed into the Pentagon.
Right, part of the concern is that there are still pieces. There are essentially 5 floors to the Pentagon. There's a hole about 200 feet. We've all seen the pictures. Next to that, they're apparently inside on some of the concentric rings. There are still 4 and 5 floors that, according to some fire crews, are essentially hanging by a thread. So part of the effort, before they can even go in to try to find more of the bodies in some of the places that might not be as obvious, part of the effort, according to the rescue crews, is simply build up some structure work to essentially give more support to some of these precarious pieces of beam, these precarious beams and metal structures. And they say a lot of that work has to be completed before some of the fire crews will feel that it is safe for them to go farther in. One of the things that we have seen them doing is they will actually take a crane and drop a basket down into the crevice to try to see where there might be some supports needed, where might the fire crews be able to go. That's also, we understand, how they dropped in some of the listening devices. They were hoping that they might see some signs of life, but unfortunately they have heard over the last 24 hours absolutely nothing.
Another difference between the scene here in New York and the scene there is that in New York City, people are still walking around in shock and disbelief at what happened, whereas, as we spoke about earlier, David, you say that people at the Pentagon, not surprisingly, since it's the military headquarters, are a little more battle-hardened.
Rick, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's sort of every expectation that a number of the people at the Pentagon here have served at various military installations around the world. Unfortunately, this has been something that the military has faced before. I think one other difference, Rick, is simply the proximity. In Manhattan, of course, as you know, very tightly crowded there together, so many people affected. Here, we're about as close as just about anybody in the area. We're about 500 yards away from the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is really sort of separated from the rest of the city. The highways around the area have been closed, and it's really difficult for people in the Washington area to get a sense as to what's really happened here at the Pentagon. Unlike where in New York, you just look up and you see that the World Trade Center towers are not there. Here at the Pentagon, that's not that same sort of visual impact on residents across the city.
David Schuster at the Pentagon. David, thank you very much.
Attorney General John Ashcroft is calling this the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America. Of course, the investigation going on both in Washington, D.C. and in New York. And some reports are now saying that as many as 50 people might have been involved in these terrorist attacks. Todd Connor has been following this for us all night and into the morning and has the very latest on the search for suspects. Hi, Todd.
Hi, Lori. Hi, Rick. Well, the LA Times reporting that 40 of those 50 are accounted for, with 10 of those still on the loose. And law enforcement sources now telling our Rita Cosby that searches for these killers have spread over 6 states and 20 locations in those 6 states. Most of those are on the East Coast, but later today, the FBI is expected to search some homes and businesses on the West Coast. Now, the LA Times gives us our first look at a possible hijacker. If we can take a look at the LA Times website. This man that you're going to see here is Emmanuel Atta Muhammad. He is believed to have been enrolled in a Florida flight training school at one time, and according to a detective in the Venice, Florida Police Department, FBI agents identified him as one of the men who flew the hijacked jets. Very important report in the LA Times today. Also today, from Florida to Boston, FBI agents armed with guns and search warrants. They looked for leads into who is behind these attacks. At the Westin Hotel, for example, 3 people were taken into custody. However, we should note that those 3 people were later released. And down in South Florida, FBI agents searched at least 3 homes there. One of the homes was rented to a couple and their 4 children until this past weekend, when we are told they abruptly moved. Investigators taking away bags of evidence, and at 2 other homes lived pilots. One was taken into custody. At this time, as far as we know, he has not been arrested. The other one was just gone from that location. Also, as we take you back to live pictures of the rescue and recovery, law enforcement sources are telling Fox News that at least one of the hijackers had a ramp pass, which means he would have had the ability to get weapons on board and anything else he wanted. And Fox News has learned a few months ago an American Airlines crew in Rome, Italy had their hotel rooms broken into, and stolen were pilots' uniforms and IDs. Now, 2 weeks ago, American even issued a memo to employees to be on the lookout for imposter pilots. Officials telling us, though, at this time, they're not sure if this had anything to do with the attacks. And one last thing, if I may, that's very disconcerting, at least to me. The New York Times reporting today that officials told them a group of 5 men suspected of assisting the hijackers had set up their cameras along the Hudson River, which is just across from Manhattan. They had trained those cameras on the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. Now, officials telling the New York Times they photographed those attacks and were said to have congratulated each other after the attacks on the World Trade Center. Lori, Rick, back to you.
Jeez.
All right, it's unbelievable. Todd Connor, thanks very much, Todd. You know, it goes without saying that airport security in this country has suffered a catastrophic failure, and to some airline passengers, all of this might come as a shock, but there are a lot of people who follow the airline industry very closely. They know what goes on at the airports, and they say they're not surprised at all. William Lajeunesse has more.
Airport security, our systems say experts, is full of holes from baggage check-in to the cockpit door.
There's a small latch, but as we've seen before, that latch can be broken very easily to somebody who's serious about getting in the cockpit. It can be done with a heavy object, a blunt object. It could be done with a rope. It could be done with a small knife. So it doesn't have to carry a gun through security.
That poses a tough challenge for those who screen carry-on luggage. According to reports, our weakest link. After the crash of TWA Flight 800, a dozen government audits revealed gaping holes in passenger screening, calling airport staff underpaid, inexperienced, and poorly trained. Baggage screeners earning $6 an hour with no fringe benefits. At some airports, turnover exceeded 400%, compared to 50% in Europe, where airlines typically hire ex-police.
That's the key point right there, is the people who are checking the X-ray machines. Are they qualified? They know how to do the job. Are they strong enough to question people as they come through?
Sorry. Another problem? Hoping to save money, some airports have outdated technology. Some airlines refuse to use bomb detection equipment because of flight delays. And while experts admit it's impossible to stop everyone and every threat, they can learn from every incident. One airport audit showed undercover agents using phony IDs and uniforms penetrating security 70% of the time. Others in plain clothes illegally boarded airplanes well before check-in. It got so bad that 2 years ago the FAA threatened to put armed agents on every plane, but backed down after the airlines complained. And next week, the agency was scheduled to release mandatory tough new rules on baggage screening. In Los Angeles, William Lajeunesse, Fox News.
Well, we here at Fox pride ourselves in taking your phone calls every day, and this day is no different. We want to hear what you have to say about what has been going on in the last close to 48 hours now, as we look at a picture of the hand-by-hand process of sifting through the rubble down in Lower Manhattan, where just 48 hours ago, the two World Trade Center towers stood proudly. Our first call is Satara in Illinois, and good morning to you, Satara.
Good morning.
What is on your mind this morning?
Well, I just wanted to let people know that I'm an Arab American, and I was born in New York, and watching this over the past few days has really just made me sick. I mean, just physically sick. I wanted to let people know that no one calling themselves a Muslim would murder people like this. It's just very emotional.
I'm sure it
for
is.
me. I'm sorry. I just want everybody to send out their prayers and their love to these people.
Well, Satara, you're right about that. Everybody needs our prayers right now in New York, Washington, really all around the country. Let me ask you a personal question.
Mm-hmm.
Have people been looking at you a little differently the last couple of days? Are people staring at you because you're Arab American? Are they?
No, I mean, I'm not sure that they would know. I don't cover my head. I mean, I'm Muslim, but I don't cover my head.
Okay.
And I have a lot of friends who know me and know about my culture, and know about my religion, and know that this is not something that we condone, that it's wrong. It's suicide and it's murder, two things in Islam that are wrong. So.
And yet there are some people who are willing to lose their lives over this. We don't know exactly who is responsible, although all leads are pointing to Osama bin Laden and some of his followers.
Well, unfortunately, like in every religion, there are very misguided people who take the scriptures and corrupt them.
Right. Satara, thank you very much for the call
Thank
tonight.
you.
We appreciate it.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Let's go to Texas now, and Kyle, you're on the phone. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning. I live in New Jersey. I'm one of the people who's kind of trapped in Texas.
What do you mean by that?
I had a flight that was supposed to go back into New Jersey on Tuesday, and because of this...
Because of all the planes being grounded, you haven't been able to get home.
Exactly. And, I mean, I would love to be there helping out because I'm CPR and first aid certified, as well as a certified welder. But unfortunately, I can't be. But what I have noticed is that everyone is so focused on the New York side getting into the wreckage and trying to get people out. I'm wondering, has anyone focused on the New Jersey side going into the sub-basement?
The New Jersey side down near the World Trade Center, are you talking about that near the PATH trains?
Yes.
Well, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question, but we do know that rescue workers have been underground. They have found pockets underneath. You know, there's that whole mall area underneath the World Trade Center Plaza, and that is an area where rescue efforts are going on right now. But as far, I'm curious, and do you have any information? Have you been able to get any information from your airline in terms of when you might be able to get home? Because we heard today from the Transportation Secretary on Wednesday, actually, that people whose flights were diverted and only those people who were ticketed to fly would soon be able to get home. Do you know about that?
Well, I'm actually at my destination. I mean, my flight wasn't diverted. I came into Dallas on Thursday of last week. I was supposed to fly back out to New Jersey on Tuesday, but all my flights were canceled. But what I was saying was, as far as the sub-basement, if they go through the PATH system, especially at the Exchange Place station, one stop, the next stop after Exchange Place is the World Trade Center.
Right.
The sub-basement, which is below the mall area. I know this because I used the PATH system a lot.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now, and I understand now, I'm told that the debris, a lot of the debris when the buildings collapsed, fell north onto that area that you're talking about. Well, we'll stay tuned to Fox News, Kyle, and we'll continue to check and get some information for you on that.
All right, let's go clear out to Hawaii now, where Norma joins us. And Norma, good evening to you. What do you make of what you have seen so many thousands of miles away from where you are?
God, I can only tell you, it's so frustrating to be so far away and not be able to do anything. The mood here, I live on the Marine Corps base, and my first thought, I'm ashamed to admit, yesterday morning, when I woke up and my mother-in-law called me from California to let me know what was going on. And I thought, dear God, don't let them find out, because I don't want my husband going to war. He is an excellent Marine, though, and he helped me understand. We have a 10-month-old son, so I thought, I don't want my husband going to war and my son growing up without a father. And my husband helped me to understand that, I married him when he was already in the Marine Corps, and I knew, on some level, I knew that one day he might have to go to war, but I just never expected anything like this to happen. And the mood here is, everyone is so frustrated, and now little by little we're beginning to understand, that I got together with a few of the other wives this morning, and we were in class, and we were just started discussing the whole issue, and we've all just made up our minds that, we have to support our husbands, and we're the backbone, we have to support them and not make them feel guilty when they have to leave, and just get everything ready. We're running around like, chickens with our heads cut off, trying to get powers of attorney done.
Well, Norma, indeed, we may see a lot of activity in the coming months, and we wish you and your family the best of luck. And of course, all of our military forces will be needing all of our good thoughts and prayers. Norma in Hawaii, thanks for the call, and thanks to all of you for calling in this morning. Well, now we want to go to our senior financial correspondent, Brenda Butner, who has a look at how the foreign markets are reacting to what happened almost 48 hours ago. And Brenda, I know that you have some news about the Nikkei and possibly some other markets?
Yes, some minus signs in Paris, London, and Germany, but not significant drops. And as in Asia, we don't expect to see much definitive action one way or the other out of the overseas markets overnight. That's because the last time we heard the closing bell ring out trading on Wall Street was Monday afternoon, the day before. And tomorrow it will once again be silent. No equities trading in the U.S. for the third day in a row. Not since the Great Depression have we seen such a long, unscheduled stop to the markets. But not for much longer, say NYSE and NASDAQ officials. Wall Street wants to get to business as usual as early as Friday and no later than Monday. They intend the opening bell to be heard far beyond the canyons of Wall Street, a signal that though terrorists could fell buildings, they cannot bring down the free markets. Now, the challenge is to effectively communicate transactions in an area that is essentially a war zone, so you should expect some glitches at first. Wall Street has never been through such a disaster, but the intent is to start sooner rather than later. And the overseas markets offer some clues into what may happen when we do once get business underway. Remarkable resilience overseas. Also, some of the more defensive plays, such as gold, which had spiked initially after the attack, lost some of their Tuesday gains. We can also learn from history. It shows that U.S. stocks have been strong in the face of terrorism and war, whether the Gulf War or the bombing of the Trade Center or even the assassination of a president. So the numbers may indeed take quite a tumble once we hear that bell, either Friday or Monday, but don't assume that will set the tone for the longer term. Back over to you, Lori and Rick.
Senior business correspondent Brenda Butner. Brenda, thank you very much. It is just about the bottom of the hour now, and we want to get you caught up on all the latest news that we have for you this morning, because things have been developing overnight.
That's right. We're getting information literally every few minutes. We want to bring you up to date on the very latest developments. Emergency workers are continuing to dig hand by hand through the rubble at Ground Zero, which of course is where the World Trade Center towers once stood. The death toll is expected to be enormous, into the thousands. 82 deaths have been confirmed so far at that location. There are reports that Afghanistan is bracing for an imminent U.S. attack. Meantime, the U.S. State Department is advising worldwide caution. And the Los Angeles Times is reporting that a team of 50 people may be responsible for carrying out these strikes. Also from the Los Angeles Times, FBI agents have found suicide notes in New York that were written by some of the hijackers. As we look at video there of the very first plane coming into the first World Trade Center tower Tuesday morning.
You know, so many people, especially people here in the New York City area, waiting on word or the possible fate of their loved ones who have been missing since Tuesday's terror attacks. And we in the media are doing what we can to help to get word out about those who are still unaccounted for. Penny Crone is among our reporters who's trying to help.
This terror has broken so many hearts. So many people are so frightened and so desperate to find their loved ones. We have hundreds of these pieces of pictures, of an identification that people here have been handing to us and asking us, can you help us? Can you help us find them? Right now at Bellevue, it is closed. Before, earlier, people were able to go in and check the names. And we have this young lady with us. You said you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And tell me, your daddy was in World Trade Center?
Yeah, he was in Tower 2 in the 96th floor. And it's been desperate since yesterday. This is tragic. This is not fair.
We are, you know, that the media, the police department, the firemen are all working. You have to take care of yourself and keep hoping. You know that.
Yes. And please, if you find him, his name is Archangel Vasquez. He's 6 foot tall, bald. I look just like him, so...
You don't have a picture?
No, I don't.
But you must take care of yourself and your new baby to come.
Thank you.
He would want that.
Yes, he would.
And then, hopefully, you'll find him.
Thank you.
Penny Crone reporting. Well, no doctors can help one of the victims in the worst terrorist attack in America's history, the World Trade Center itself. But before those twin towers, those 110-floor towers were lost forever, the buildings managed to survive an impact that would have instantly destroyed most skyscrapers and buy enough time to save countless lives. Claudia Cowan reports.
Once the jewels of New York's skyline, the World Trade Center towers stood up against terrorism long enough to save countless lives.
The plane came through, it took out a few of the exterior columns of the building and then set off this massive fire with the jet fuel. And fortunately, because of the perimeter tube system of the building, it was able to withstand the initial impact and allow a lot of people to get out.
Other buildings would have toppled immediately, but the towers remained upright for nearly an hour, supported on the outside by closely spaced steel columns and struts, and on the inside by a second set of columns designed to bear the load of gravity. A double support system that withstood the crash, but not the raging jet fuel fire.
The girders or the joists that hold up the floors collapsed, and as those fell to the floor below, they overwhelmed the capacity of that floor, and we had was what we call a progressive collapse, which then continued on through the base of the building until it was a complete and total failure.
Most experts say tall buildings will continue to be made out of steel. What may change, they say, is the design of signature skyscrapers, the tallest and most exposed buildings. They may never be built in quite the same way.
It's not like we could ever design every building for this scenario, or should we? But after every major earthquake, for example, we change our building codes to improve our practice in the future, and I would expect a similar thing will happen here.
One possibility, designs that include more escape routes around the perimeter of the building as well as in the center. But experts say no building can withstand an attack by a pilot willing to die for a cause. The challenge ahead, simply finding ways to reduce the loss of life. In San Francisco, Claudia Cowan, Fox News.
You know, as investigators search through the rubble here in New York City, in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, and also in Pennsylvania, one of their goals is to try to find that cockpit voice and data recorder at each one of those sites, the so-called black boxes that may hold the key to a lot of our unanswered questions. So what exactly are they, and why are they so valuable? Fox News correspondent David Schuster explains.
The so-called black boxes are actually fluorescent orange, and by airline regulations, nothing else can be this color on any commercial aircraft. There are usually 2 boxes on each flight. Investigators consider both to be essential because one records cockpit conversations and sounds, the other records technical data.
The flight recorder is very good at telling us what's wrong with the airplane, things that are actually, engine quit, landing gear didn't come down, something like that. Something that actually has to do with the airplane. That's the flight recorder's strong point. The voice recorder is very good at this operational, the man-machine interface, the crew and how they interact with the airplane and decisions that they make.
The recorders are usually located in the back of a jet. That's because the most predictable point of impact in a crash is towards the front. Still, the boxes are made to withstand forces 10 times greater than a crash and temperatures higher than those caused by burning fuel.
Most of the cockpit voice recorders and flight recorders that we get look just like this. They look probably as good as the day they were made, maybe a few scratches and a few dents. Every once in a while we will get a recorder that has been smashed.
If it has been smashed in water, that is usually not a problem. Recorders retrieved from the ocean are kept in ocean water until investigators examine them.
It's the air that hurts the tape once it's been wet. It actually will start to rust. So we have them shipped here in water, and then as soon as we're ready to play them, we take them out of the water, dry them off, and then get a good copy of it before anything starts to deteriorate. We have had recorders underwater for upwards of 6 and 7 years, and they're just fine.
The flight data recorder, which tracks the technical and mechanical information, comes in 2 different formats. The first is a tape-based recorder, which gathers data on a 30-minute loop. The second format records data on computer chips and can compile more than 25 hours worth of flight information. It all comes out as numbers, calculations, or technical words and bits.
It's actually a waveform that is then, it's zeros and ones that our software decodes into numbers, and then we can bring it up on the screen and see altitude and airspeed and different flight control positions and pitch and roll and what the aircraft is actually doing. It looks like a strip chart with the lines moving across the screen.
At this station, flight data recorder specialist Cassandra Johnson examines a tape-based recorder. She has downloaded the data, and her computer software has made the conversions.
We're reading it out, we're getting good data, we have a graph of the incident or accident, and we will pass it along to the investigator so that they can see what the recorder is telling them about the aircraft. And the most important part is for them to focus on a certain systems.
What the recorder is telling them is not always easy to picture, so the safety board sometimes generates a data-based animation to help explain what happened. This one is from a 1999 American Airlines crash. An MD-82 was coming into land at the airport in Little Rock, Arkansas.
It was almost midnight, as you can see by the time up here. There were storms in the area, and the aircraft landed on the runway, proceeded to skid around on the runway, and then went off the end of the runway down an embankment, impacted a steel structure, and 11 people, including the pilot, were killed.
In that particular crash, investigators were also helped by the cockpit voice recorder. It revealed the pilots knew about the storms but thought they had a clear path down the runway.
And approach American 1420, I know you're doing your best, but we're getting pretty close to the storm. We'll keep it tight if we have to.
Cockpit voice recorders give investigators a good idea of what the crew was doing when the incident happened. It can also paint a personal picture of despair and confusion.
Sometimes the crew doesn't have any idea what's going wrong. They don't have any more idea than we do what's going wrong with the airplane. They may say things that are just completely not right because from the information that they have, that's their analysis of that information, and it's very difficult sometimes to do that on the fly when things are really going badly.
Vern Ellingstad is director of the Office of Research and Engineering at the NTSB. He says the safety board learns something new from every incident or crash.
Aviation accidents are a very rare event. It's a very safe form of transportation, and the predictability of what might go wrong in each of these kind of rare circumstances is very difficult. So we do recover a huge amount of important information.
Some safety experts believe it is not enough, and already the NTSB is considering whether recorders should have their own power supplies. In the crash of a Swiss Air jet, the last 6 minutes were not on the data recorder because of an electrical problem in the plane. The safety board is also thinking about placing video cameras in the cockpit. Still, investigators believe that nothing provides as much information as the so-called black boxes. They are the key, say the experts, to piecing together what happened. In Washington, David Schuster, Fox News.
All right, let's turn our attention now from the black boxes to this surreal scene in Lower Manhattan. At 4:40 a.m. in the morning, hundreds of firefighters, rescue crews, police officers, FBI, sifting through the rubble, continuing to dig through hand by hand at ground zero from Tuesday morning's attack. What's been called a bucket brigade, and if you look closely, you can literally see these workers handing buckets to each other. They are having to do this very piecemeal, hand by hand, David versus Goliath kind of process. The progress is maddeningly slow for these folks. And now we look at a picture from the Pentagon, where the plane slammed into it just moments after the plane slammed into the two World Trade Centers. The damage not as bad there, but still, it's going to be a long time before the Pentagon is the same. A lot of structural damage there, about 5 stories there. A big gaping hole in the Pentagon and just rubble in New York City.
You know, it's amazing. Just as we look at that picture of the Pentagon and we see what's left of the World Trade Center bombing, I was thinking about the images of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City that, you know, is now just a part of our collective consciousness. We all know what that building looked like, of course, before it came down. These images are still fresh, but we will all know them. They're all becoming all too familiar to us.
Those open floors, just rows and rows of floors, and not so many with the Pentagon, but yes, it's frighteningly familiar. All right. Well, moving on to something else that's very frightening. Some of the passengers on United Flight 93 appear to have taken on their hijackers before crashing eventually in Pennsylvania. One of the victims called his wife on a cell phone and told her they were being hijacked.
She told him what happened at the World Trade Center towers, so he knew about that. And he called back later to say that he and some other passengers were planning to act, and they may have acted against the hijackers. We may never know exactly what they did for sure. He wasn't the only passenger who made a last-minute call.
As terrorists took over 4 flights Tuesday, passengers and crew members used cell phones to reach out with urgent cries for help, with information for authorities, or with last-second words of love for family members. Mark Bingham was aboard United Flight 93, which had left Newark for San Francisco. He reached family members at home.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again.
I said that?
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
An unidentified man hiding in a bathroom aboard Flight 93 dialed 911 on his cell phone to reach a dispatcher outside Pittsburgh. We are being hijacked. We are being hijacked. This is not a joke, he said, before his phone went dead. Aboard the same flight, Lauren Grancolis, on her way home to San Francisco from her grandmother's funeral in New Jersey, was able to reach her husband, Jack. We have been hijacked, she told him. They are being kind. I love you. Flight attendant C.C. Ross of Fort Myers, Florida, put through a panicked call to her husband, Lauren Lyles, who had just gotten their 2 sons off to school. He heard screams in the background as she told him, we've been hijacked. I love you. I love the children. Still on Flight 93, Thomas Burnett called his wife Dina and told her of a final act of resistance to terror. I know we're all going to die. There's 3 of us who are going to do something about it, he said. Flight 93 was the only plane that didn't reach its target, crashing into an empty field in southern Pennsylvania. Peter Hansen of Groton, Massachusetts, was aboard United Flight 175 with his wife and their 3-year-old daughter as it left Boston for Los Angeles. He reached his father in Connecticut. Hansen told his parents he knew they were all going to die, but he tried to reassure them. Don't worry about us. It's going to be quick, Hansen told his father. United Flight 175 was the second plane to crash into the World Trade Center. Fox News commentator Barbara Olson was aboard American Airlines Flight 77 as it left Washington for Los Angeles. She was able to place 2 calls to her husband, Theodore Olson, the U.S. Solicitor General. Our plane is being hijacked. She then asked, What should I tell the pilot? The call was cut off, but she immediately called back to ask again, what should I tell the pilot? Those were her final words as minutes later, American Flight 77 became a massive missile and crashed into the Pentagon. Steve Brown, Fox News.
The search for whom might have been involved in to coordinate and carrying out these attacks continues, and it's not just going on in this country, it's going on overseas as well. Todd Connor joins us now from Fox Central with some late-breaking developments. Todd?
That's right, Rick and Lori. A little nugget of information coming to us from Hamburg, Germany. Investigators over in Germany right now working under very tight security as they go through an apartment where two men believed to be linked to these terrorist attacks in the United States once lived. We'll take a look at the video now from the LA Times website earlier today. You're looking at one of those suspects, Mohammed Atta. Rita Cosby also brought you his name and his picture earlier last night. He and another man, Marwan al-Shehi, were once students at a Florida flight school and had arrived from Germany to Florida in July of 2000. So this apartment that they're searching today in Germany, these suspects hadn't lived in for really more than a year, but still investigators hope to gain some sort of information, gain some kind of clue from this apartment where apparently two suspects in the terrorist attacks once lived. Again, these two men came from Germany in July of 2000. They lived in Florida at least until January, where they were students at Huffman Aviation Flying School down in Florida. So that's the latest from here. Back to you two.
All right, Todd, thanks very much.
All right, well, we've been taking your phone calls throughout the evening and now into the early morning, and we always love to hear from everyone. In times like this, sometimes it's helpful to say what's on your mind, and we appreciate everyone who has called in.
And the first person we're going to talk to right now is from California. Cal, you're on the line. Good morning, Cal.
Good morning. How are you?
We're doing okay. How are you doing?
Well, it's been a terror day.
Yep.
Terror second day.
Yep. It's going to be terror weeks and months, Cal.
It will be. First, I would like to send condolences to everybody's families and friends of all the people that have lost their lives. And from being from a Middle Eastern descent, being here a long time, I would like to let everybody know that anybody who would commit an act like this is truly a terrorist. But I also would like to everybody to be able to distinguish between terrorists and Muslims. There's always been a thing about Muslim terrorists, and really good Muslims believe in the book, just like Christians and all the other religions. And I would like to let everybody know that we condemn killing even one person, let alone quantities. The book tells us we have to live in peace. God is one and only, and we all believe in living in a peaceful world. And I would like to let everybody know that Muslims, real Muslims, don't do these kind of acts. Terrorists do. And we're against anybody and everybody who takes one single life.
Cal, has anybody taken out their anger or frustrations against you or anyone in your family?
Personally not, but however, the mosques in California, and especially the in Santa Clara, which is a very active mosque, has received many terror telephone calls, threatening telephone calls. Personally, I have not had any problems. My neighbors and everybody around are very good American citizens who believe in peace like I do. And we all share the same mentality, which is we believe that peace is really what should be and not these kind of acts. And being a true Muslim, I would let everybody know in the United States and would love to have the media try to be able to distinguish between a terrorist and a Muslim, because a true Muslim will never do such an act.
Well, by calling in tonight, I think that
and do me a favor, please.
All right.
Let our educators, because here in California, educators are again associating Muslims with terrorists. One of my friend's kids are going to school and hearing these remarks, Muslim terrorists, this and that. And it would be nice to have our educators educate people that there is a difference.
Well, I think there will be time for the media to talk about that very subject, and we appreciate you calling and giving us some education on it. Thanks very much, Cal.
All right, let's go all the way out to Hawaii now, where Nathaniel is on the line. And Nathaniel, this is many thousands of miles away from you, but what do you make of what you have seen in the last 48 hours?
Well, of course, it's just absolutely terrible, and my condolences go out to all those who've been affected by this tragedy. I'm really calling, though, because I'm starting to see a theme on a lot of the news programs where people are saying that the intelligence community must have failed at some point in time. And I myself work in the intelligence community, and I'd like to let people know that, you know, we work very hard with what we have, but even some of the news organizations saying as many as 50 people being involved, you have to take that into consideration. That's 50 people out of the billions of people in this world. And we're not infallible. Nobody is. And for years we've been asking for more money, especially for the human intelligence side of the business, and it hasn't come around. And maybe it takes something like this for people to